A mafia boss discovered a dying nurse in an alley. His unexpected reaction left everyone speechless. They found her file before they found her body. That was the part that nobody talked about later, not the ambush, not the 2 bullets, not the blood trail that stretched 40 feet across cracked asphalt before it stopped. What nobody talked about was that the men who shot Natalie Wescott had taken their time. They had gone to her apartment first. They had opened her laptop. They had searched every folder, every subfolder, every backup drive she owned. Sip scene. They had deleted 31 files and walked out calmly, and only then had they driven to the service road where they knew she would be coming home from her shift. They wanted her discredited before she was dead. Think about that for 1 second. Think about what kind of organization destroys a woman's evidence before it destroys the woman. If you were Natalie Wescott, what would you have done? If the most powerful medical institution in your city had already taken your career, silenced your report, buried your dead sister's name in a database, nobody would ever audit and then sent men with guns to finish the job, what road would you have turned down? She turned down the one that led to Damon Alderidge. Whether that was the worst decision of her life or the only decision that saved it, you are going to have to watch until the very end to find out. Before we go any further, if you are new here, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell here do not go where you expect them to go. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us the city and country where you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that service road. Let's go back to 3:11 in the morning. Let's start from the moment everything changed. The road did not have a name on any map Damon Alderidge had ever seen. That was by design. The strip of cracked asphalt running behind the old Callaway textile mill had been useful to his family for 30 years, precisely because it did not appear on any map, did not feed into any camera grid, and was not patrolled by anyone with a badge. It was the kind of road that only existed for people who needed things to happen without witnesses. Damon drove it alone that night, which was unusual. He was not a man who moved without at least one car behind him, but his meeting with the dock supervisors had run past midnight, and he had sent the others home. He was tired in a way he did not want anyone to see, the slow, grinding exhaustion of a man who had spent 20 years being responsible for everything, and could not afford to let that show. He saw the truck before he saw her, a dark green pickup, late model, rolled onto its drivers in the shallow drainage ditch that ran alongside the mill's rear fence. One headlight was still burning, throwing a pale cone of light sideways across the weeds. The engine stopped, no hazards blinking, no sound at all except the tick of cooling metal. Damon pulled over. He sat in his car for 30 seconds and looked at it. In his experience, 2 things ended up on this road at 3 in the morning, his own people and problems. The truck was neither one he recognized. That meant it was a problem. He got out anyway. He had gone maybe 15 feet when he heard her voice. Don't. One word. Low and completely controlled. Don't come closer until I tell you it's okay. He stopped. She was on the ground on the far side of the truck, half hidden by the passenger door, which had popped open in the rollover and was now resting against the ditch wall at an angle. She had positioned herself against it. Deliberately, he understood that immediately. She had crawled to the most defensible position available to her and was using the door as partial cover. Her scrubs were blue. They had been blue. There was enough blood soaked into them, now that the color was academic. "You're hurt," he said, obviously. Her breathing was careful, controlled. The breathing of someone who had decided that panic was a luxury she could not afford. "Who are you with?" "What? Are you with the men who ran me off the road? Because if you are, I need you to understand something before you decide what to do next." A pause. "I have a phone in my right hand with a message queued up. The second I stop pressing this button, it sends. You want to know where it sends before you make a decision." Damon looked at her hand. He could not see it clearly in the bad light, but her arm was angled in a way that suggested she was not lying. "I'm not with anyone who ran you off a road," he said. "I was driving past." Silence. "This road doesn't get driven past," she said. "No, it doesn't." Another silence, longer this time. "Damon Alderidge," she said. It was not a question. He felt the particular cold that moved through him when someone said his name who should not know it. It was a specific sensation, different from ordinary surprise, something between alertness and threat assessment. The feeling of a man who had learned to distinguish between the two very quickly, because the difference between them was the difference between walking away and not walking away. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said. He kept his voice level. "You know who I am, and I don't know who you are." Natalie Wescott. She coughed once, sharp and involuntary, and he heard her suppress the sound immediately afterward, the way someone suppresses pain they don't want noticed. "I'm a nurse. I've been shot twice. The entry wounds are in my left side. One of them is lower than I'd like, which means there's a question about my count that I can't answer until someone with more imaging than I have access to. Right now takes a look." Another careful breath. "I know where I am. I know whose road this is, and I came here on purpose." Damon did not say anything for a moment. "You came here on purpose," he repeated. "I was trying to find you. I didn't expect them to find me first." A brief pause. "I need help, but I need the right kind, which means I need you to listen to me before you do anything." "What kind of help?" "Not an ambulance," she said immediately. "Not Stonehaven Memorial. Not any hospital inside the Stonehaven Medical Group network. Do you understand? Those are the closest facilities. I know where they are. I worked at Stonehaven Memorial for 4 years." Her voice did not change. It was flat and direct and utterly without self-pity, and that flatness unsettled him more than anything else about the situation, because people in the amount of pain she had to be in did not speak that way. "If you take me there, I will not come back out. And I don't mean that the way people say it when they're scared. I mean it as a statement of fact. Do you have a doctor? Someone outside the system?" Damon looked at her for a long moment. He had been in situations where someone tried to use their own operations as leverage. He had encountered plenty of people who calculated that being wounded in front of him gave them some protection. He understood the game, and he had never particularly respected it. But Natalie Wescott was not playing a game. He could not have said exactly how he knew that. Standing on a service road at 3 in the morning, looking at a woman he had never met who was bleeding into the dirt with a phone in her hand and a claim she had come here deliberately. He could not have explained it. He just knew it. The way. He knew most things, from the look in someone's eyes when they were performing and the look when they were not. She was not performing. He pulled out his phone and called Marshall Keene. Marshall picked up on the second ring. He always picked up on the second ring, no matter the hour. In 31 years of working for the Alderidge family, Damon had never once been sent to voicemail. "I need you," Damon said. "Service Road, behind Callaway." "Bring the kit." 10 minutes, Marshall said, and hung up. Damon crouched down at a distance that he judged was close enough to be useful, but far enough to let her feel she still had some control over the situation. "There's a man coming," he said. "His name is Marshall. He was a corpsman in the Navy. He's not a doctor, but he knows what he's doing. When he gets here, he's going to look at you. You can tell him what he needs to know. Does he know to bring pressure bandaging? He'll have what he has. Tell him." She stopped, breathed, started again. "Tell him the lower wound is the concern. Tell him I think it's missed the kidney based on the pain location, but the bleeding is significant. Tell him I'll need volume replacement before I can be moved safely, and if he has a saline lock in that kit, I need him to establish access immediately." "Can you remember that?" Damon looked at her. "Yes," he said. He called Marshall back and repeated it verbatim. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "She a medical person?" "Nurse." "Okay," Marshall said. "I'll bring the IV kit." While they waited, Damon sat on the ground near the truck's rear wheel well. Not close. Not far. The weeds were cold and damp with whatever the Providence night had been putting down all evening, and he did not particularly care. He had sat in worse places for less reason. "How long were you trying to find me?" he said. 3 years, Natalie said. He absorbed that. "That's a long time to look for someone." "I know where you live," she said. "I know your front gate code and your back gate code and the schedule. Your security rotation runs on Tuesday and Thursday nights." A short pause. "I wasn't trying to find you the way most people look for someone. I was trying to find the right moment. What makes tonight the right moment?" Tonight is the right moment because they just deleted 31 files that took me 2.5 years to collect, she said. And they would have deleted me too, except I was apparently faster than they expected. Her voice did not carry bitterness. It carried only the dry, careful precision of a woman who had long since processed her own emotions about the situation and arrived somewhere on the other side. The moment I was looking for was supposed to come with more preparation. This is what I have instead. Damon was quiet. You want to ask me what the files were about, she said. I figured I'd wait until someone has looked at those wounds. The wounds can wait 30 seconds. She shifted slightly and made a sound she immediately controlled, a tight exhale through her nose. Your mother's name was Margaret Alderidge. She was 61 years old. She was admitted to Stonehaven Memorial 3 years ago with a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. She spent the last 6 weeks of her life on the 4th floor, bed 12. A pause. She died 40 hours after you arrived. Damon's hand resting on his knee went very still. You were there, she said. The whole time. You didn't leave. Splitting. They brought you food you didn't eat, and you sat in the chair beside the bed, and when she couldn't sleep, you talked to her about things I couldn't hear from the hallway. And one afternoon, it was a Tuesday, you were holding her hand, and she made a sound that scared you, and you gripped tighter, because that's what people do when they're frightened and they don't know what else to hold on to. A short silence. And a nurse came in and didn't say anything, but she put her hand over yours and showed you not with words, just by moving your fingers, how to hold a hand that was hurting. Damon did not speak. That was me, Natalie said. He remembered. He would not have been able to describe her face if someone had asked him an hour ago. He had not looked at her face. He had looked at his mother's face, looked at the edge of his vision, and the nurse had come and gone at the edge of his vision, the way people concentrating on something that matters more than anything else in the room. He remembered the hand over his. He remembered learning, in that moment, that he had been gripping too hard. He remembered his mother's face changing slightly when the pressure eased. I remember, he said. She talked about you, Natalie said. After you fell asleep in that chair, she and I talked. She talked about you the way mothers talk about the child they spent the most time worrying about. Another careful breath. She was a good woman. I want you to know that I believe that, not as something I'm saying to make you more likely to help me, but because it's true and because it matters for what I'm about to tell you. Headlights appeared at the far end of the road. Marshall's car moved slowly, without urgency in its appearance, because Marshall had learned 30 years ago that urgency on this particular road tended to create more problems than it solved. He parked behind Damon's car and climbed out carrying a large black duffel bag, and he crossed the ground without being told where to go because he had already assessed the situation from 60 feet away. He crouched beside Natalie and looked at her without speaking for a moment. You the nurse? He said. Yes. Lower wound left side? Yes. I've been maintaining pressure with my right hand. The upper wound I'm less worried about. I think it's a through and through in the shoulder with no arterial involvement, because I still have distal sensation and the bleeding is slower than the other one. Marshall unzipped the duffel with practiced efficiency. You're going to feel me put a line in your right arm. I'm not going to warn you every time I do something. There's not time and you seem like you don't need it. I don't, she said. Go ahead. He worked quickly. She did not flinch, which Marshall would mention later in a tone of pure professional respect. She watched what he was doing with the focused attention of someone cross-referencing his technique against her own training. And once, when he adjusted the pressure dressing on the lower wound, she said quietly, tighter, and he made it tighter without question. Damon watched them from outside the cone of the truck's remaining headlight. He was thinking about bed 12. He was thinking about the untouched bowl of soup that always sat beside the window because his mother had stopped being able to eat 2 weeks before she died, and he had kept ordering it because ordering it made him feel like he was doing something. He was thinking about Tuesday afternoon and a nurse's hand over his, and the specific quality of quiet in a hospital room at 2 in the afternoon when the person you love most in the world is sleeping, and you are watching them breathe and wondering how many breaths are left. She can be moved, Marshall said after 11 minutes. Barely. She needs a surgeon within 2 hours, preferably one. I know a name, Natalie said. Her voice had thinned slightly, but her eyes were clear. Evelyn Harrow. She's retired. She operated on cardiothoracic cases for 20 years at Rhode Island Hospital before she left the system. She has a private clinic in Cranston. She owes a debt to a woman named Caroline Merrick. She stopped. Something passed across her face, not pain from the wound. Something else. She owed a debt to Caroline Merrick. Caroline is dead now, but Evelyn doesn't know that yet. Tell her Caroline sent me. Damon looked at Marshall. Marshall shrugged. I know the name, Harrow. She's good. Call her, Damon said. While Marshall made the call, Damon came and crouched beside Natalie. Up close, her face was the color of old paper, and there were shadows under her eyes that had not arrived tonight. Those were the shadows of someone who had not slept properly in a long time. Her scrubs had a hospital's name printed on the chest, but it was not Stonehaven's name. It was a smaller urgent care brand. Her badge, clipped to the pocket, had a photograph that did not look like her, or it did look like her, but from a time when she had been someone slightly different. Someone who had not yet spent 3 years carrying whatever she was carrying. You said you came here on purpose, he said. Yes. And before you could get here, someone ambushed you. Yes. Which means someone knew you were coming. She looked at him steadily. Or someone knew I was getting close to something that would make coming to you the logical next move. What is the logical next move? That's the conversation, she said. The one I came here to have. She closed her eyes for a moment, and he thought she was losing consciousness, but when she opened them again, they were just as clear as before. There are things your mother's records don't show. Things that don't appear anywhere in any official documentation associated with her care. I know what those things are, Mr. Alderidge, and I've spent 3 years proving it, and 31 of my files were deleted tonight, which means I'm the last copy of certain information that certain people very much want to disappear. What kind of information? Marshall came back. Harrow will see her. We need to go. They got Natalie into Damon's car with Marshall's help, slowly in stages, with Natalie directing her own transfer the way a field medic directs a stretcher, calmly, precisely, without any drama at all. She told them exactly how to move her, when to stop, when to adjust. She apologized once, briefly, for being heavy. Neither of them responded to that. Damon drove. Marshall sat in the back with Natalie and maintained the pressure on the lower wound. The drive to Cranston was 22 minutes at 3:30 in the morning. For the first 8 minutes, nobody spoke. Then Natalie spoke from the back seat. Her voice was quieter now, working against something, but still precise. The medication your mother received in her final weeks, she said. There were 2 drugs, a pain management protocol, and a secondary cancer targeting agent. Standard of care for her diagnosis, a pause for breath. The vials those medications came from were registered in Stonehaven's pharmaceutical inventory. They had lot numbers, documentation, chain of custody records. Everything looked correct, but Damon said, but the concentrations were wrong. He kept his eyes on the road. Wrong how, he said. Diluted, she said. Significantly diluted. The pain management medication, in particular the concentration your mother received, was approximately 40% of the labeled dosage. Which means, for the last 3 weeks of her life, her pain was approximately 2.5 times worse than her care team believed it was, based on medications they believed they were administering. Her voice did not shake. It did not go soft. It delivered that information the way she had been delivering everything else as fact, because facts were what she had, and facts were what mattered. She told me. She told me she hurt more than they seemed to think she should, but she didn't want to say anything because she didn't want to seem a brief pause difficult. Damon's hands tightened on the wheel. He said nothing. She was not difficult, Natalie said quietly. She was right. And they told her she was wrong, because all the documentation said the medication was correct. And an entire institution's paperwork is a very hard thing to argue against when you are 61 years old and very sick and trying not to be a burden to your son. The streetlights of the highway passed over the windshield in steady intervals. Where did the real medication go? Damon said. His voice was controlled. Extremely controlled. I'll tell you everything, Natalie said. When I can think more clearly, I promise you, I will tell you everything. A pause. But I need you to understand one thing first, before we get there. Before I tell you who did this, and how they did it, and for how long her breathing was getting shallower and she was working to keep it steady. I need you to promise me that your first answer is not going to be violence. Because your first answer being violence is why they're not afraid of you finding out. They're counting on it. Damon looked in the rearview mirror. Marshall was watching him. Why would they count on it? Damon said. Because a dead man can't testify, Natalie said. Because burned evidence can't be reburned. Because the moment you use your power, the way you always use your power, everything I have spent 3 years building becomes exactly what they want it to be, the paranoid obsession of disgraced nurse and the criminal vendetta of a mafia boss. She stopped. Collected herself. They are waiting for you to be angry. Please don't be what they're expecting. In the rearview mirror, Marshall met Damon's eyes and held them for 3 seconds. Damon looked back at the road. He thought about his mother in bed 12, telling a nurse she hurt more than the doctors thought she should, and apologizing for the inconvenience of her own agony. He thought about a woman who had refused to sell her waterfront property, who had built something and meant to protect it, who had raised a son in a world that had very few rules and had tried, in her quiet and imperfect way, to teach him the ones that mattered. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon and a nurse's hand moving his fingers, showing him, without a single word, how to hold something fragile without breaking it. I'm not promising anything yet, he said. Natalie made a sound that might have been a short laugh. That's fair, but I'm listening. That's enough, she said. For now, that's enough. They drove through the empty streets toward Cranston, toward Evelyn Harrow's clinic, and whatever came after it. And behind them, the service road sat empty in the dark, and the one headlight from Natalie's wrecked truck kept burning into the weeds until sometime around 4:30 in the morning, when the battery finally gave out. In the truck's cab, among the broken glass, and the scattered contents of a bag that had come open in the rollover, Marshall had found 3 things before they left: a laminated hospital badge with Natalie's photograph, issued by Stonehaven Memorial and expired by 2 years, a water-stained spiral notebook with a rubber band around it, every page filled with small, dense handwriting, and a plain white envelope, sealed, with no name on it. Inside the envelope was a single index card. On one side was a street address, a waterfront gate address that belonged to Damon Alderidge's private dock access, the one that appeared on no document and had been used for things that would never appear on any document. On the other side, in the same small handwriting as the notebook, was one sentence. If I don't make it there, tell him about bed 12. Marshall stood in the cold weeds beside the ruined truck and read it twice. Then he put it in his pocket and got in the car. And he did not tell Damon about it until they were sitting in Evelyn Harrow's waiting room at 4 in the morning, listening to sounds from the operating room that neither of them particularly wanted to interpret. He handed Damon the envelope without speaking. Damon read it. He sat with it in his hands for a long time. Outside, Providence was beginning its slow gray turn toward morning. The city was waking up the way it always woke up. The docks, the bakeries, the early commuters entirely unaware that somewhere in a clinic in Cranston, a woman was bleeding on a table because she had spent 3 years trying to find a way to tell one man the truth about his mother. And the man was sitting in a plastic wait room, holding a card with his own gate address written on the back of it, and realizing for the first time in longer than he could remember that he had absolutely no idea what to do. Evelyn Harrow came out of the operating room at 6:47 in the morning, smelling like antiseptic and old coffee, and she pulled her mask down around her neck and looked at Damon Alderidge sitting in her waiting room like she was looking at a problem she had already solved once and was tired of being asked to solve again. "She's stable," she said. Damon stood up. "Sit down," Evelyn said. "I'm not finished." She was 72 years old and had spent decades standing over operating tables, and had decided somewhere along the way that she was no longer interested in softening her delivery for anyone's comfort. The lower wound was closer to the kidney than she thought. I repaired the damage. She lost significant blood volume, and I've got her on a transfusion now. She needs 48 hours minimum before anyone moves her anywhere, and she needs complete quiet and toe stress, which I understand is probably not what either of you had planned for this week. Can I see her in an hour? When she wakes up, Evelyn looked at him for a moment. She told me, while I was prepping her, that Caroline Merrick sent her. That's what she said to tell you. Caroline Merrick has been dead for 11 days, Evelyn said. I found out 4 days ago. A colleague called me. Said it was a cardiac event. Her eyes did not change expression. Caroline was 53 years old and ran 6 miles every morning. She had the cardiovascular profile of a woman 20 years younger. She paused. So when a shot-up nurse arrives at my door in the middle of the night and tells me Caroline sent her, I'd like to understand what that means. So would I, Damon said. I'm working on it. Evelyn looked at Marshall, who was standing near the window with his arms folded and his eyes at half-mast, the way he always looked when he was more awake than he appeared. You vouching for him? She asked Marshall. I've been vouching for him for 31 years, Marshall said. My track record's mixed. Evelyn made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Go get some sleep, both of you. There's a room in the back with a couch and a cot. Don't touch anything in the equipment cabinets and don't answer my door if someone knocks. She went back through the door she had come from. Damon stood in the empty waiting room with the index card still in his hand, the one Marshall had given him an hour ago, the one with his own gate address on one side and the single sentence on the other. He had been holding it for most of the last 2 hours, without realizing it, the way you hold something small and specific when everything else around you is too large to grip. Marshall looked at him from across the room. You should sleep, Marshall said. You know what was in those medication vials, Damon said. It was not a question. She told me what she told you. She told me they were diluted. She didn't tell me what they were diluted with, or who ordered it, or how long it's been happening. She'll tell you when she wakes up. She might not wake up. Evelyn said she's stable. Evelyn said she's stable for now. Damon set the index card down on the end table beside the chair and looked at it. I want to know who was in that truck behind her. I know you do. I want names, Marshall. I understand that. So, let me make some calls in the morning. Marshall's voice was patient, but it had an edge under the patience that Damon recognized the edge of a man who was drawing a line carefully and wanted it to be noticed. Let me make the calls before you start making decisions about what to do with the names. That's what I'm saying. I heard what you said. You heard it. I'm not sure you're listening to it. Damon picked up the card again. She said they're counting on me being angry. She's right. I am angry. I know. Marshall uncrossed his arms and sat down in one of the waiting room chairs with the slow, deliberate movement of a 60-year-old man whose knees had been complaining since roughly 2009. Angry's fine. Angry's appropriate. Angry is not the same as stupid, and you've spent 20 years making sure those two things didn't happen at the same time. He looked at Damon. Don't let tonight be the exception. Damon sat down. The waiting room was small and smelled like the specific combination of bleach and old carpet that all medical waiting rooms smelled like, regardless of how private or how expensive they were. A clock on the wall said 6:54. Through the single window, the sky over Cranston was doing its reluctant early morning thing, going from black to the specific gray-purple that preceded actual light. He had not slept. He was not going to sleep. He thought about his mother in the last week of her life, telling him the pain medication wasn't working the way it should. He had not thought much of it at the time. Or rather, he had thought of it the way you think of something that an entire medical institution has already assessed and decided upon. Which is to say he had deferred to the institution the way people defer to authority when they are frightened and exhausted. And the alternative is assuming that something is wrong in a way they don't have the knowledge to fix. Margaret's had said it hurt more than they thought. The nurses had adjusted her dosage. The doctors had explained that pain tolerance varied. And Damon had sat in that chair and told himself that they knew what they were doing. Because the alternative was something he had not been ready to sit with. He was ready now. He closed his eyes and did not sleep, and waited for Natalie Wescott to wake up. She woke up at 8:15, and the first thing she said was, "The notebook." Damon was in the chair beside the bed, a different bed, in a different room, but the chair was in the same position relative to the bed as the one at Stonehaven had been, and he registered that without examining it. Marshall stood near the door. We have the notebook, Damon said. Natalie's eyes moved to the ceiling, then to him. She was pale in a way that had texture to it, like old bone rather than paper, and there were IV lines in her right arm and a monitoring clip on her finger. She looked like someone who had recently been through surgery and was assembling herself back from the pieces, doing it methodically, testing each piece before she committed weight to it. Did anyone open it? No. There's a rubber band around it. Still there, she closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were focused. Okay, I need to tell you things in a specific order, and I need you to not interrupt me until I've finished because the order matters. Can you do that? Probably not, Damon said honestly. But try me. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of what a smile might look like if it had been worn down by weather. Your mother was not the only patient. She told him about the pattern. She told it slowly. The way someone tells something they have practiced telling, the way someone tells a thing they have rehearsed so many times in their own mind that they have ground it down to its essential skeleton, stripped away everything that was not structurally necessary. Stonehaven Medical Group operated 4 hospitals and 1 centralized pharmaceutical processing facility. All medication, every controlled substance, every cancer drug, every high-cost infusion protocol was ordered centrally, processed centrally, and distributed to the 4 hospitals through a single logistics pipeline. It was efficient. It was cost-effective. It was, on paper, a model of modern healthcare administration. It was also a perfect architecture for theft. Diluting high-concentration medications was not a new crime. It had been done before, by pharmacists, by technicians, by people with access and motive. But the Stonehaven operation was different in its scale and in its target. They had not targeted all patients. They had targeted specifically the patients least likely to notice and least likely to be believed, terminal cancer patients in their final weeks, patients on end-of-life pain management, patients whose families were already grieving and whose deaths, when they came, were expected and explained by the disease itself. The real medication, the properly concentrated, properly documented medication that had been signed out of the pharmacy on paper, disappeared into a resale network. Stolen pharmaceutical compounds, repackaged and sold through channels that Natalie had identified, but not fully mapped. She had identified 71 patients across all 4 hospitals over a 6-year period. Margaret Alderidge was number 43. Natalie's younger sister, Rebecca Wescott, who had died at 20 years old from a cancer that everyone, including the oncologist, believed had simply progressed too aggressively, was number 12. Damon listened. He did not interrupt. He sat in the chair beside her bed, with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely folded. And he listened to the whole thing in the complete silence of a man who has decided that whatever he is feeling, wait until later, because right now the most important thing is to not miss a single word. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. 71, he said. That I can confirm. There may be more. The pattern started, as far as I can establish, approximately 8 years ago. But my documentation of the earlier period is incomplete because the records management system they used then was different, and some of what I'd found in the older records was in the files that were deleted. How did you find it? The way you find most things that are hidden very carefully, she said. By looking at something small that didn't match and not letting it go. She shifted in the bed slightly, and he saw her process the pain and set it aside. I was with your mother on a Thursday night. She was having a difficult night, not unusual given where she was in the progression. I administered her pain medication and nothing changed. That happens. Pain management is imprecise. But something about the lot number on the vial was different from the lot number I documented for the same medication 48 hours earlier. A different lot number isn't unusual in itself, but the concentration on the label was identical, and when I held the 2 vials up, she stopped. The color was slightly off. The solution was slightly clearer than it should have been. You noticed that. I've been a nurse for 6 years. You spend enough time with these medications and you develop a calibration for what they're supposed to look like. A pause. I told myself I was wrong. I administered it, and I told myself I was wrong because an entire hospital system cannot be wrong when you are one nurse on a night shift. A sound like green wood splitting the phonies, something that had been sitting under the flatness, something that had been sitting there long enough that it had become structural. She died 4 days later, and I could not stop thinking about those 2 vials. You reported it, Damon said, internally. Yet her eyes went to the window and came back. 6 weeks after Margaret died, I submitted a formal concern to Stonehaven's Pharmaceutical Compliance Office. I had documentation, lot numbers, my own observations, a preliminary comparison I'd done across 5 other patient records that showed a similar pattern of pain management underperformance relative to documented dosage. She paused. They told me my concerns had been reviewed and found to be without foundation. 3 weeks later, there was a note in my employment file. A single allegation improperly accessed patient records. It was fabricated, but it was specific enough and documented enough that every major hospital in the state runs a background check and finds it, and that one note is enough to make them choose the next candidate. They killed your career. They made me invisible, she said, which turned out to be a mistake. For the first time, something in her voice had an edge. Not anger, something colder than anger. Something that had come out the other side of anger a long time ago and hardened. Invisible people can go a lot of places that visible people can't. I took a night shift job at an urgent care clinic outside the Stonehaven network. I spent 2.5 years accessing public pharmaceutical records, discharge databases, insurance claim patterns, state health department audit trails. Anything that was publicly available. And I put together what I could, piece by piece, and eventually I had 71 names and enough documentation to be credible. And then you went to Caroline Merrick. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Caroline was a state health inspector, senior position. I chose her because I'd watched her work for 2 years, the way she handled investigations, she documented findings, the way she refused to accept institutional explanations without independent verification. She was meticulous. Another pause. I gave her everything I had. The complete file. She reviewed it over 3 weeks and told me it was credible and that she was going to open a formal inquiry. Her voice went very flat. That was 42 days ago. She died 22 days ago. Her computer was accessed 11 days ago. 4 days later, the men came for me. Damon stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room and looked at the small parking lot behind Evelyn's clinic, 2 cars in it, a patch of urban grass between the asphalt and the fence line. You should have come to me sooner, he said. I couldn't, she said. Coming to you meant trusting that you wouldn't respond with violence before I could make the case for why violence was the wrong answer. I needed the evidence to be complete enough that walking in here was worth the argument. A pause. And I needed to be sure about one other thing first. What? She was quiet for long enough that he turned around. Your father's shipping records, she said. The room changed. Not physically. Nothing moved, nothing made us a sound. But the room changed in the way rooms change when something is said that cannot be unsaid, something that reorders the space around it, say, and makes everything that came before it look different. What about them? Damon said. His voice was very quiet. Stonehaven's pharmaceutical facility has a refrigerated cargo contract. Has for over a decade. Cold chain pharmaceutical shipments, incoming raw compounds, outgoing processed medications. She watched him. The contract for transportation of that cargo ran through Alderidge-controlled dock facilities for 11 years. The records of those shipments, the manifest records that would have shown what was actually in those containers versus what the documentation said was in those containers, those records were handled by your logistics operation. Damon did not move. Your father signed the original contract, Natalie said. He died 8 years ago. You took over the operation 6 years ago. The contract continued. You've been approving the facility fees and the dock access schedule on a recurring quarterly basis. Since then, she stopped. I don't believe you knew what was in those containers. I want to be clear about that. I have spent a significant amount of time thinking about whether you knew, and everything in the operational pattern suggests the cargo was documented as standard pharmaceutical cold chain freight, which for a criminal organization managing a major port is just background noise. It would not have stood out. She held his eyes. But your name is on those approvals. 6 years of quarterly approvals. Marshall, near the door, had gone very still. Damon looked at Natalie Wescott in the hospital bed. She had been shot twice in the last 12 hours. She had survived surgery, lost significant blood, and woken up to tell him, among other things, that the same criminal operation that had diluted his dying mother's pain medication had been running its supply chain through his docs with his signature on the paperwork. She told him that to his face without flinching. He thought about saying several things. He rejected all of them. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "You could have led with the 71 patients and left that part out. I probably would never have found it. You would have found it," she said. "Or they would have used it. Either way, you needed to hear it from me first, in a controlled setting, before anything else happens." She adjusted the IV line on her arm with small, careful movements. "I'm not telling you to hurt you. I'm telling you because what I'm about to ask you to do is going to require you to trust me, and you cannot trust me if I've held anything back." "What are you about to ask me to do?" "Give those records to a federal prosecutor." Marshall made a sound near the door that was not quite a word. "Not just the Stonehaven records," Natalie said. "All of them. Everything that documents the dock operation as it relates to that cargo contract." Which means she stopped. "You know what it means. It means handing a federal prosecutor evidence of my own criminal operation." "Yes, in exchange for what?" "In exchange for the truth being on record somewhere that nobody can delete it," she said. "In exchange for 71 names being in a federal court document that gets attached to a case that results in a conviction. In exchange for your mother's medical record being officially amended to reflect what actually happened to her." She paused. "I know what I'm asking. I know what it costs." "Do you?" "I know it costs you everything you've built. Then you understand why I need a minute before I answer." "Take the time you need," she said, "but not too much of it. Because the people who deleted my files and ran my truck off a road are going to realize very quickly that I'm not dead. And when they do, they're going to move faster than they've been moving." Her voice was steady. "They're going to move the inventory. They're going to start covering the paper trail. And once the pharmaceutical evidence is physically gone, what I have in that notebook is substantial, but it's not sufficient for federal prosecution on its own." Damon looked at Marshall. Marshall looked back at him with the expression of a man who had understood exactly where this conversation was going for the last 30 minutes and had been deciding how he felt about it. "Outside," Damon said. They went into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind them. The hallway was narrow and smelled like antiseptic, and there was a folding chair against one wall that had someone's forgotten cardigan draped over it. Damon leaned against the opposite wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way it set when he was working through something he did not want to work through. "Talk," he said. "She's right about the dock records," Marshall said quietly. "I've known about the cargo contract for years. I didn't know what was in the containers, and I didn't ask," which he stopped. "Which is the problem, isn't it? You should have asked." "Yes, I should have." Marshall did not look away. "So should you." The hallway was very quiet. "If I give those records to a federal prosecutor, they're going to open a case against the Alderidge operation," Damon said. "Not just the cargo contract, everything adjacent to it. Probably everyone who works for me. Some of them. Yeah. People who've been loyal for I know how long," Marshall said. "I'm one of them." He let that sit for a moment. "But here's the thing. We have been doing what we do for a long time, and we made our choices, and most of the people who work for you made their choices knowing what they were choosing. That's different from a woman in a hospital bed who was trying to get home from her nursing shift and was targeted because someone wanted her evidence gone." He paused. "That's different from 61 women who told her nurses the pain wasn't working and were told they were wrong." Damon closed his eyes. 61 women, he said. 71 patients. Some of them were men. Damon opened his eyes. "Don't correct me right now, Marshall. Sorry." They stood in the hallway for a while. "She said she had a federal prosecutor in mind," Damon said. "She mentioned that in the car. Rebecca Langdon. I know that name. She's investigated us before. Twice. Didn't get enough to move forward either time." Marshall paused. "She's the kind of prosecutor who actually wants to know what's true. Not just what's winnable. She has a reputation for." For what? For not being impressed by people like you. Good, Damon said. That's what I need. Marshall looked at him carefully. You're moving fast. Someone out there knows Natalie is still alive. They're going to figure out she came to me, and when they do, they're going to start thinking about how to make that a problem. Damon pushed off the wall. I don't have the luxury of moving slow. He pushed the door open and went back into the room. Natalie was awake and watching the door. She had used the time he was gone to push herself slightly more upright against the pillow, the kind of small, stubborn adjustment that said she refused to receive information lying flat. I have a question, Damon said. He sat back in the chair. Before we talk about prosecutors, I need you to answer something honestly. Go ahead. You said my mother was different from the others. Natalie was quiet for a moment. I wasn't going to get to that today. Get to it now. She looked at the window, then back at him. The other 70 patients, the ones I can document, fit a clinical profile. Terminal diagnoses, end-of-life care, patients whose deaths were predictable within a defined window. The medication diversion was a crime of opportunity within a broader trafficking operation. They weren't targeted individually. They were targeted as a category. But Margaret refused to sell property, Natalie said. Blackwater Point. I found the records in a state commercial real estate database. Stonehaven Medical Group made 4 separate purchase offers on that waterfront parcel over a 5-year period. The property is ideally located for a pharmaceutical distribution hub, direct water access, existing cold chain infrastructure, favorable zoning. She stopped. Your mother refused every offer. The final refusal was 59 days before she was admitted to Stonehaven Memorial. The air in the room went very still. 59 days, Damon said. Yes. You're telling me I'm telling you what the timeline shows, she said carefully. I cannot prove intent. I cannot prove that her admission was engineered. I can prove that she received diluted medication during her care, and I can show you the timeline of those property offers and her refusal, and I can tell you that the gap between the final refusal and the admission is 59 days. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were watching him with the careful attention of someone who knows they're standing close to something that could go badly wrong. What that means is something a federal prosecutor would need to investigate. Damon sat very still for a very long time. He thought about his mother refusing to sell Blackwater Point. He could hear her saying it not dramatically, not with any particular heat, just with the flat finality of a woman who had made her decision and did not see the need to elaborate on it. It's not for sale. It was your grandfather's. It will be yours. That's the end of it. She had said it 4 times, apparently. Once for each offer. 59 days later, she was in bed 12, and she was dying in more pain than anyone around her understood. I need to make a call, Damon said. His voice came out very controlled, which cost him more than he was willing to show. Damon Marshall started. I'm not calling anyone to hurt anyone, Damon said. I'm calling my attorney. He stood up and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame without turning around. The notebook, he said. Is everything in it? Everything I can reconstruct from memory is in it, Natalie said. The 31 files they deleted, I've been rewriting them from memory every night for the past month, just in case. It's an 11-page summary with lot numbers, patient names, dates, and the relevant cross-references to public records that would allow an investigator to independently verify the pattern. She paused. It's not the digital files, but it's accurate. How accurate? I'm a nurse, she said. I document for a living. I do not make errors in documentation. Damon nodded once without turning around and walked out into the hallway. Marshall stayed in the doorway. He looked at Natalie for a moment. He's not going to do anything stupid, Marshall said. It sounded like he was saying it to himself as much as to her. I know, Natalie said. He's going to do something hard instead. She settled back against the pillow and closed her eyes. That's worse, actually. For him. Marshall watched her for a moment. Yeah, he said. It is. He went out into the hallway where Damon was standing with his phone to his ear, speaking to his attorney, in a voice so quiet it was almost inaudible. And the words Marshall could make out were measured and specific and entirely unlike the words of a man who had decided to solve his problems with the tools he had always used before. They were the words of a man who had decided that the cost of those tools was something he was no longer willing to charge to other people. Through the clinic's narrow front window, the Providence morning had gone from gray to the flat white of an overcast October sky, and somewhere on the other side of the city, in an office or a boardroom or a comfortable house, in one of Providence's better neighborhoods, someone was sitting with their morning coffee and not yet knowing that Natalie Wescott had survived the night. That window was closing, and Damon Alderidge had just called his attorney and started the process of handing over the one piece of evidence that would make it impossible legally, formally, permanently impossible for him to ever go back to the life he had built. He had not made the decision easily. He had not made it cleanly. But he had made it. And in the world Damon Alderidge came from, the world where your word was the only currency that actually held its value, a decision made was a decision made. There was no road back from here. Damon's attorney called back at 9:43 in the morning. His name was Victor Hale, and he had been the Alderidge family's legal counsel for 19 years, which meant he had received phone calls at unusual hours about unusual subjects for 19 years and had developed the specific vocal quality of a man who processes alarming information without allowing alarm to enter his voice. "I need you to listen to what I'm about to say," Damon told him, "and I need you to not ask me any questions until I finish." "That's never a good opening," Victor said. "No, it isn't." He told Victor enough. Not everything, not the specific contents of Natalie's notebook, not the details of the pharmaceutical operation, not the names, but enough. The cargo contract, the dock records, the quarterly approval paperwork bearing Damon's signature across 6 years, the nature of what those approvals had, unknowingly, facilitated. There was a silence on Victor's end that lasted long enough to be meaningful. "You want to voluntarily surrender documentation to federal authorities," Victor said. Finally, "I want to know what that process looks like. It looks like the end of your current life as you understand it." "I know that. Then why are you asking me how instead of whether?" "Because the whether is already decided." Another silence. Shorter this time. Victor was a man who adapted quickly to new information, which was most of what Damon paid him for. "I need 48 hours to make preliminary contact," Victor said. Discreet contact. There's a way to do this that protects you to the maximum extent possible within the parameters of what you're describing. There's also a way to do this that doesn't. I need 48 hours to set up the former. You have 24, Damon. 24 hours, Victor. The situation has a time component that doesn't accommodate 48. A long exhale on the other end. "I'll call you by tonight." Damon hung up and stood in the narrow hallway of Evelyn Harrow's clinic with the phone in his hand and the particular sensation of a man who has just initiated something that cannot be stopped. The feeling of weight shifting from the place where it had been resting for a very long time onto ground that has not been tested. He went back into the room. Natalie was asleep. Genuinely asleep this time. Not the controlled stillness of a person resting while remaining alert, actual sleep. With the slight slackness around her jaw and the slower rhythm of her breathing that indicated her body had finally overridden whatever she had been using to keep herself running. Evelyn was checking the IV line. She looked up when Damon came in. "Let her sleep," Evelyn said quietly. "She needs hours, not minutes." "I know. There's coffee in the room in the back." "It's bad coffee, but it's hot, and you look like you need something to hold on to." She glanced at him with the precise evaluation of a surgeon assessing a patient without appearing to. "You've been up all night. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're functional. There's a difference." She finished checking the line and straightened up. "Go sit down somewhere. The notebook is on the counter in the back room." Nobody's touched it. Damon went to the back room. It was small and cluttered with the organized chaos of a retired physician who had converted a storage space into a working area, shelves of reference texts, a counter with medical supply boxes stacked neatly, a cot against one wall that Marshall was currently occupying, with his eyes closed and his arms folded over his chest, and his breathing in the slow, even pattern of a man who could sleep anywhere under any circumstances and had been doing exactly that for 6 decades. The notebook was on the counter, where Evelyn said it would be. Damon sat down and looked at it without opening it. was a standard spiral notebook, college-ruled, the kind sold in packs of 3 at any drugstore. The cover was dark blue and water-stained, and the rubber band around it was the thick kind used for produce, doubled over itself twice. The pages visible at the top edge were filled with dense handwriting in black ink, small letters, tightly spaced, the handwriting of someone who had long since stopped caring about legibility for other people and was writing for precision. He took the rubber band off. He opened it to the first page. The first thing on the first page was a list of lot numbers. 40 of them, sequentially organized with dates beside each one. Below the lot numbers was a column of patient identifiers, not full names on the first page, but case numbers, cross-referenced to a coding system, explained in a small legend in the upper right corner. Below that were what appeared to be concentration measurements, handwritten in a consistent format, labeled value, then a slash, then an estimated actual value, then a percentage differential. The differentials ranged from 38% to 67%. He understood what that meant. He had understood it when Natalie explained it, but seeing it written out in columns with dates and numbers made it different. Made it a record instead of a story. Made it a thing that had happened in a specific way to specific people on specific days, rather than an abstraction that could be processed at emotional arm's length. He turned pages. She had been thorough in a way that went beyond thorough. She had not simply documented the discrepancies. She had documented her own documentation process, noting the source of each piece of information, the method by which she had accessed it, the date of access, and any limitations or uncertainties in the data. She had flagged her own weak points. She had noted 3 instances where her memory of a specific lot number might be off by 1 digit and had written alternative possibilities beside those entries. She had distinguished between what she had witnessed directly, what she had inferred from records, and what she had been told by secondary sources. It was the most careful, most honest piece of documentation Damon Alderidge had ever read, and he had read a great deal of documentation in his professional life, and none of it had ever been written by someone who had been shot. He was on page 7 when Marshall's voice came from the cot. "You should put that down. I'm fine. You're going to hit something in there that's going to make you want to make phone calls, and you shouldn't make those phone calls." "I know, do you?" Damon turned another page and stopped. The page had a heading. The heading said, "Patients with potential individual targeting distinguishable from general protocol." There were 4 names on that page. Full names. The other pages used coded identifiers. These 4 had full names, with detailed notation beside each one, explaining why they had been separated from the general case. Margaret Alderidge was the last of the 4. The notation beside her name was longer than the others. It included a summary of the Blackwater Point property records, the 4 purchase offers from Stonehaven Medical Group, the dates of each offer and each refusal, and then a timeline that Natalie had drawn as a simple horizontal line with marks on it. Final refusal day 0. Change in GP referral pattern day 31. Admission to Stonehaven Memorial day 59. Death day 103. Below the timeline was one sentence. "This patient may not have been collateral damage." Damon sat with the notebook in his hands. From the cot, Marshall did not say anything. He had read the expression on Damon's face and made the calculation that silence was the appropriate response. The clock on the wall said 10:22. Damon set the notebook down with the careful deliberateness of a man setting down something that he has decided he will not allow himself to throw. "I need air," he said. "Damon, I'm not making calls. I need to stand outside for 5 minutes." He stood up. "Stay here." He went through the clinic's back door into the small lot behind the building. The October air hit him like a correction, cold and direct, and completely indifferent to whatever he was feeling, which was what he needed. He stood on the asphalt with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at the fence line and breathed. His mother had refused to sell Blackwater Point. 59 days later, she was dying in a hospital bed, in more pain than anyone around her understood, and she was apologizing to nurses for being difficult about it. He stood outside for 8 minutes. He did not make any calls. He went back inside. Marshall was sitting up on the cot, with his elbows on his knees, awake and watchful in the way he was always watchful. The way 31 years of operating in Damon's world had made him permanently, professionally watchful. The page with the 4 names, Damon said. I saw it, Marshall said. When? Before we left the service road. I read the first few pages when I was getting the notebook out of the truck. He paused. I should have told you. Yes. I was trying to get you through the night without. I know what you were trying to do. Damon sat back down in the chair across from the cot. The property, Blackwater Point. You knew about the offers. Marshall was quiet for a moment. Your mother told me about the second one. She asked me not to tell you because she knew how you'd react to someone pressuring her about the land. She was right about how I would have reacted. Yeah. And she handled it herself. The way she always handled things. Marshall looked at the floor. She called me after the 4th offer, about 6 months before she got sick. She said they'd sent someone in person that time. Not a letter, not a realtor. Someone who came to the house. He stopped. What did they say? She didn't tell me word for word. She said they told her that she should think carefully about her family's future before she made a final decision. Marshall's voice was steady, but there was something under it, controlled with effort. She said it felt different from the other offers. She said it felt like a different kind of conversation. She told you this, and you didn't tell me. She asked me not to. Marshall, she asked me not to, Marshall said again, and this time the steadiness cracked slightly around the edges. She was your mother. She had handled every difficult thing in her life without involving you until she had to, and she was 60 years old, and she was not going to start asking her son to fight her battles for her over a piece of land. He looked up. I respected that. I should have found a way around it. I didn't, and I have been sitting with that since the day she died. The room was very quiet. Damon looked at Marshall Keene, 60 years old, who had been beside him since Damon was 8 years old, and Marshall was 29 and had come to work for the Alderidge family as a dock manager, and gradually, over 3 decades, had become something that did not have a clean name in the world. They both operated in not an employee, not a friend exactly, not family in any formal sense, but the person Damon called at 3 in the morning, who always picked up on the second ring. You should have found a way around it, Damon said. Yes, Marshall said. I should have. They sat with that. Tell me the rest, Damon said. That's the rest. She didn't say anything else about it, and then she got sick, and then she was gone. And the property passed to you by default, and nobody from Stonehaven has contacted you about it since. Because they didn't need to, Damon said slowly. Because they expected me to sell. They expected her death to produce an heir who would look at a piece of waterfront property and see money, not history. Marshall nodded once. They don't know me very well, Damon said. Apparently not. A sound from the hallway, Evelyn's footsteps, the specific measured pace of someone who moves through a medical space with long-established efficiency. She appeared in the doorway. She's asking for you, Evelyn said to Damon. Both of you. They went back to Natalie's room. She had pushed herself fully upright now, which Evelyn had clearly not endorsed given the expression on the surgeon's face. But Natalie was sitting up with the careful rigidity of someone using their back muscles to compensate for not being able to use their core, and her color was marginally better than it had been at 8:15. And her eyes were the same as they had been throughout, clear and specific, and doing their continuous, quiet assessment of everything in the room. You read the notebook, she said to Damon. It was not a question. Yes, the page with the 4 names. Yes, she looked at him for a moment. Whatever she was checking for, she appeared to find a qualified version of it. Okay, then you understand where we are. She glanced at Marshall, then back to Damon. I've been thinking, while I was sleeping. There are things we need to do in the next 24 hours that have to happen in a specific sequence, and the sequence matters because the wrong order makes any of them useless. She shifted slightly. Has your attorney made contact with anyone yet? He's working on it. He said tonight. Okay, good. Before he makes that contact, I need to add something to what he's carrying. She looked toward the counter where the notebook sat. The 11 pages in that notebook aren't enough on their own for federal prosecution. They're enough to open an investigation. What makes them prosecutable is the pharmaceutical inventory that actually exists, the physical vials, the compounding equipment, the resale documentation. Right now, all of that is in a facility somewhere in this state. Once Stonehaven understands that I'm alive and that I've made contact with you, they will move it. She held Damon's eyes. We have a window, and the window is probably closing right now while we're having this conversation. What do you need me to do? Damon said. I need you to. Her phone buzzed on the bed beside her. She looked at it. Her face changed in a way that was specific and controlled, but visible the change of someone who has received information that has altered their immediate understanding of their situation. What? Damon said. She held up the phone. The screen showed a news alert from a Providence local outlet. The headline read, Nurse wanted for questioning in narcotics theft investigation. Below the headline was Natalie's photograph, her name. A statement from the Providence Police Department attributed to Detective Grant Hollister, identifying her as a person of interest in an ongoing investigation into theft of controlled substances from a medical facility, falsification of pharmaceutical records, and driving under the influence in connection with a single vehicle accident on the Callaway Mill Service Road. Single vehicle accident. Damon read that phrase twice. They found the truck, Marshall said. They found the truck, Natalie said, and they've already written the story. Her voice was entirely flat. I'm not a victim. I'm not a witness. I'm a drug-addicted nurse who stole narcotics, falsified her own records, drove drunk, crashed her vehicle, and is currently evading police. She set the phone down with the careful precision of someone who understands that the gesture of throwing it would cost them something they cannot afford to spend. They're not trying to kill me anymore. They're trying to make me into someone nobody will believe. Damon looked at the photograph on the phone screen. It was her employee badge photo from Stonehaven, 2 years old, from before whatever the last 3 years had cost her. She looked younger in it, more open, the specific look of someone who had not yet learned that an entire institution could decide to make them disappear. Who is Grant Hollister? Damon said. Providence PD. Organized Crime Division. She looked at him. He's been on Stonehaven's side since before I started collecting evidence. I believe he's the one who placed the original allegation in my employment file. I have circumstantial evidence of that in the notebook. A pause. I don't have proof that ties him to Caroline's death. But the timing of the warrant, the search warrant that just went out for my arrest, the timing tells me he's been aware of what Stonehaven needed from him for years and has been providing it. I know Hollister, Marshall said. Damon looked at him. Not well, but I know the name. He's come through our sphere a few times over the years, looking for information about dock operations. We always gave him nothing because he always felt wrong. Marshall's jaw tightened slightly. Splitting. Felt like someone who was looking for what he already knew existed, rather than someone who was actually investigating. Because he was protecting the operation, Natalie said. Not investigating it. The room went quiet for a moment. Then Damon's phone rang. The number on the screen was not one he recognized, which was significant, because Damon Alderidge's phone number was not known to people who were not already in his contacts. He looked at it for 3 seconds, he answered. Mr. Alderidge. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, measured. The voice of someone who had made a deliberate decision to sound calm. My name is Preston Carradine. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss. The name landed in the room with the weight of something that has been falling for a long time and has finally reached the floor. Natalie's eyes went to Damon's face, and she read something there that made her go very still. Mr. Carradine, Damon said. His voice was perfect. Nothing in it. I'm not sure how you got this number. I have resources, Carradine said, as I imagine you're aware. We haven't spoken before, but I've been aware of your family's operation for many years. Your father was a pragmatic man. I always respected that. He's been dead for 8 years. Yes. And you've continued his work admirably. A brief pause. I understand you had an unexpected visitor last night. I'm calling because I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to address it before it creates problems for people who don't need problems. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I think you are, Carradine said. His voice did not change. Natalie Wescott has been building a narrative for 3 years that is, frankly, not an accurate representation of the situation. She's a troubled young woman who lost her sister and couldn't accept that medicine sometimes fails people. She spent 3 years looking for someone to blame, and she's found a compelling story that she believes sincerely, but sincerity isn't accuracy. Another pause. I understand she came to you with something she's calling evidence. I'd like to discuss what that evidence actually represents before anyone takes an action they can't reverse. Damon was looking at Natalie while Carradine spoke. She was watching his face with the focused, unblinking attention of someone who was reading an entire conversation from the visible side of one end of it. What are you proposing? Damon said. I'm proposing a conversation. In person. At a location of your choosing. Carradine's voice was smooth, the smoothness of someone who had spent decades operating in boardrooms and philanthropic circles and had learned to make even extraordinary requests sound like reasonable suggestions. I think you'll find, when you understand the complete picture, that your interests and mine are more aligned than they appear at the moment, particularly regarding the waterfront property at Blackwater Point, which I understand is now in your name. There it was. I'll need some time to consider that, Damon said. Of course. I'll give you until this evening. The briefest pause. I should mention, and I say this with genuine respect, not as a threat, that Detective Hollister has an active warrant out for Ms. Wescott. Her current location is something I'm not presently aware of, and I have no need to be. But the legal machinery around that warrant is going to move on its own schedule, regardless of what either of us decides. Another pause. I'd rather we talk first. I'll be in touch, Damon said. He ended the call. The room was very quiet for a moment. Carradine, Natalie said. Yes, he called you directly. Yes, he knows you have me, she said it, with the flat certainty of someone confirming something they had already calculated. He called you directly and referenced Blackwater Point and the warrant in the same conversation, which means he's telling you that he can protect you from what he's set in motion, or he can accelerate it, and he's giving you tonight to decide which you'd prefer. Her voice was completely controlled, which means he has someone in your organization. Damon looked at Marshall. Marshall looked back at him. He got my number, Damon said. This number. The number that 3 people have. 4, Marshall said. Victor. Victor doesn't talk. No, he doesn't. Marshall's voice had gone careful in the way it went careful when he was thinking about something he did not want to be thinking. But Victor's office has staff. Victor's staff does not know this number. No. A pause, which means it came from inside. They looked at each other across the room with the particular look of 2 men who have operated together for 3 decades and have encountered betrayal before and have developed the specific, terrible fluency of people who know how to read its early signs. Your people, Natalie said quietly. She was not accusing. She was simply naming the territory. Someone in your organization has been in contact with Stonehaven. Damon's jaw was set very tight. For how long? I don't know. But Carradine called you within. She glanced at the clock, less than 90 minutes after your attorney made preliminary contact. Which means either Victor's contact was already being monitored, or someone knew about the contact before it happened. She paused. Someone who knew you were going to make that call. The room sat with that. There were 3 people who had known about Victor's call before it was made. Damon, Marshall, and Natalie herself, who was lying in a hospital bed with 2 gunshot wounds and an IV line in her arm. Damon crossed to the window and stood with his back to the room. He ran through the last 16 hours with the methodical, brutal honesty that his world required of him. Who had known he was on that service road? Who had known he would call Marshall? Who had known about Evelyn Harrow? Who had been in the room when Natalie told him about going to Victor? He thought about Caleb. Caleb Alderidge, 27 years old, his cousin, who had been managing the logistics division for 2 years, who handled the dock scheduling, who had access to the cargo contract records, who had been in Damon's office 3 days ago, asking routine questions about the Stonehaven facility fee renewal schedule, who had a mother who depended on dialysis at a Stonehaven hospital. Marshall, Damon said. He kept his voice level and his back to the room. Where is Caleb right now? A silence. He was at the docks this morning for the 6A. Manifest review, Marshall said slowly. I haven't spoken to him since yesterday afternoon. Call someone at the docks. Quietly. Find out if he's still there and what he's been doing this morning. Damon Caleb is call someone at the docks, Damon said. Please. Marshall stepped out into the hallway with his phone. Natalie was watching Damon's back. You know who it is, she said. I think I know. Is it someone you trusted? A long pause. Yes, Damon said. He turned around. His face was composed in a way that had cost him something, the composure of a man who has processed a specific kind of pain before and knows the territory and hates that he knows it. If I'm right, it's not malicious. It's desperate, which is worse in some ways. He came back to the chair beside her bed and sat down. And it means they have the clinic's location. How quickly can we move? Natalie looked toward the door, then at the IV in her arm, then at Damon. Evelyn said 48 hours before you could be. Evelyn is a surgeon, Natalie said. She's giving me the optimal parameters. But optimal parameters and necessary parameters are different things, and we are currently in the necessary parameters zone. She looked at the IV line. I can be moved. It's going to be uncomfortable, but I can be moved. We need a new location, and we need it before this evening. Marshall came back through the door. He did not say anything for a moment. He stood in the doorway with his phone in his hand and the expression of a man who has confirmed something he was hoping to be wrong about. Caleb left the docks at 7:45 this morning, Marshall said. About 20 minutes after you called Victor. He stopped. He told the shift manager he had a family matter. He looked at Damon. His mother had a dialysis appointment today at Stonehaven Eastside. He goes with her every time. The silence in the room had a specific quality, not the silence of shock, but the silence of a specific kind of grief that does not have another name, the grief of a betrayal you understand completely and cannot forgive and cannot entirely condemn. Damon sat with it for 30 seconds. Then he said, Get Evelyn. Marshall went. I'm sorry, Natalie said quietly. Damon looked at her. Don't be. This is my world. This is what it looks like when it costs you. It still counts as a cost, even if you're used to paying it. He looked at her for a moment. You need to understand something, he said. The federal prosecutor, Rebecca Langdon. She's going to know about Caleb. If this goes where we need it to go, she's going to know about the leak, about his mother, about all of it. I can't protect him from that. I know. I need to know if that changes anything for you. About whether you trust this process. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Do you know what my sister's last 3 weeks were like? She did not wait for him to answer. She was 20 years old, and she kept telling the nurses she was cold all the time. Cold and in pain, and they kept adjusting the blankets and adjusting the dosage documentation, and nobody she stopped. Breathed. Nobody believed her, because nobody had any reason to think the medication wasn't doing what the documentation said it was doing. She looked at him steadily. I know what it cost your cousin to make that call. I know he did it because someone threatened his mother. I know it's not the same as what Carradine did. She paused. But I cannot make exceptions to the truth because the truth is complicated. The truth is always complicated. That's why it needs to be documented very carefully. Evelyn came in through the door with Marshall behind her. She looked at Natalie and then at the IV line and then at Damon with the expression of a surgeon who has been asked to sanction something she does not endorse. I understand what you want, Evelyn said to Natalie. The answer is no. Evelyn, the answer is no until you tell me where you're going and what the next 12 hours look like, and then the answer is maybe, with conditions. We need a location that Stonehaven doesn't know about, Damon said. And we need it in the next 2 hours. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Natalie. I have a sister in Warwick, she said. She has a house with a ground floor bedroom, and she will ask no questions if I tell her not to. She folded her arms. But if I move this patient in less than 48 hours post-surgery and something goes wrong, I will not be held responsible for the outcome. You won't be, Damon said. I want that in writing. I'll have Victor draft it. Victor, Evelyn said. Your attorney. Yes, the same attorney whose contact this morning apparently triggered the situation that is requiring us to move a post-surgical patient in under 12 hours. Damon did not say anything. Evelyn unfolded her arms and went to the IV line and began the process of making the necessary preparations with the efficient unhappy precision of a woman who has made her objection clear and has decided that the objection, having been clearly registered, is sufficient, and she will now do what needs to be done. 2 hours, she said. I need 2 hours to stabilize her for transport. And I'm coming with you. Natalie looked at her. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. Evelyn did not look up from what she was doing. Caroline, Merrick came to me 8 years ago when she needed someone to look at something she'd found in a pharmaceutical audit report. She sat in this clinic for 4 hours telling me what she was looking at. And I told her she was probably wrong. And I told her that the Stonehaven system was too large and too well regulated for what she was describing to be possible. She stopped for a moment, then continued. I have been sitting with that conversation since I found out she was dead. She looked up at Natalie. I am coming with you. Damon's phone buzzed. A text from a number he did not recognize. 3 words. She's at Evelyn's. He showed it to Marshall without speaking. The text was not addressed to him. It had been sent to him by mistake, or as a warning, or he looked at the number and looked at it again, and then he understood, with the specific cold clarity of a man reading a situation correctly, that it had been sent to the wrong number because someone in Carradine's network had written down Damon's number where Caleb's number was supposed to be. They had 2 hours. They probably had less. Damon stood up and looked at the room, at Natalie in the bed, at Evelyn preparing the transport IV, at Marshall by the door, with his phone in his hand and his jaw tight, and he thought about the index card in his pocket, with his own gate address on one side, and if I don't make it there, tell him about bed 12 on the other. Splitting. And he thought about his mother on a Tuesday afternoon, telling a nurse she hurt more than the doctor thought she should, and apologizing for the inconvenience of her own pain. Let's move, he said, and because there was no longer any version of the situation in which moving was optional, everyone in the room began to move, not smoothly, not perfectly, but with the grinding, costly, fully committed motion of people who have arrived at the place where there is only forward and have this in their own way. Each, that forward is where they are going. They moved Natalie at 11:43 in the morning. Evelyn had prepared a portable IV setup with the grim efficiency of someone who had done field medicine before and did not like being reminded that she had done field medicine before. She taped the line down with 3 strips of surgical tape instead of 2, checked the connection twice, a sound, and then looked at Natalie with the expression of a woman cataloging everything that could go wrong and deciding she would deal with each thing as it arrived. When we get to the car, you do not try to help yourself in, Evelyn said. You let Marshall and me move you. Your job is to not tear anything I spent 4 hours fixing. Understood, Natalie said. I need you to actually do it, not just say you understand it. I understand it, and I will actually do it. Evelyn looked at her for one more second. Fine. Damon had spent the previous 90 minutes making calls he did not make from his own phone. Marshall had a secondary number, a prepaid, rotated quarterly, and Damon used it to reach 3 people in sequence, none of whom he told more than what they needed to know for their specific piece of the next 6 hours. The first call arranged a vehicle that could not be traced to the Alderidge operation. The second call reached a contact at the Providence waterfront who could tell him, without being asked directly, whether there had been any unusual activity around the Stonehaven pharmaceutical facility's cold chain dock access in the last 12 hours. The third call was to Victor on a different line, with specific instruction on what to add to the preliminary federal contact that Victor was making that evening. Victor had said, "You understand what this additional element means for the timeline." Damon had said yes. Victor had said, "And for your exposure." Damon had said yes, make the call. The waterfront contact had called back at 11:15 with information that compressed Damon's chest in a specific way. Refrigerated cargo movement had begun at the Stonehaven facility dock at approximately 9 a.m. Sheem 2 trucks, standard cold chain, no manifest filed with the Port Authority yet, which was irregular for that facility. They were already moving the inventory. They had perhaps a day before it was gone. The car Marshall had arranged was a dark gray sedan, anonymous, the kind of car that existed in such volume in any American city that looking for it was like looking for a specific raindrop. It was parked 2 blocks from Evelyn's clinic, in a spot that had been chosen because it was not visible from the clinic's front or rear windows. Getting Natalie from the clinic bed to the car took 11 minutes. Evelyn had not overstated the difficulty. Natalie had understated it. She made no sound beyond controlled breathing. But Damon was close enough during the transfer to see the quality of that breathing and understand exactly what it was costing her to stay silent. He found that he could not look directly at her face during the worst of it, because something about watching that specific kind of controlled suffering made him want to do something that would not help. They got her into the back seat. Evelyn got in beside her. Marshall drove. Damon sat in the front passenger seat and watched the mirrors and thought. The drive to Evelyn's sister's house in Warwick was 40 minutes. For the first 15 of those minutes, nobody spoke, which was its own kind of communication, the communication of people who have agreed, without discussing it, that they need to get some distance between themselves and the last known location before they use it to breathe. At the 20-minute mark, Natalie spoke from the back seat. The inventory, she said. Her voice was compressed slightly, the voice of someone speaking carefully around pain. Is it moving since 9 this morning? A silence. How much time do we have? If they're using 2 trucks and the storage facility I think they're using, maybe 36 hours, before it's distributed enough that no single raid recovers a prosecutable quantity. Victor needs to move tonight, not this evening. Tonight means before midnight. I know, does he know? I told him. Another silence. Then the physical evidence matters. The notebook matters, but the notebook plus the physical inventory is a case. The notebook without it it's a strong start. It's not the same thing. I know that too. So what are we doing? Damon looked at the road ahead. Marshall's hands on the wheel were steady, the way they were always steady, the particular steadiness of a man who has learned that keeping his hands still is the thing he can control when everything else is moving. We're getting you somewhere safe first, Damon said. And then I need to have a conversation I've been avoiding. Natalie was quiet for a moment. Caleb. Yes. The rest of the drive to Warwick happened in silence. Evelyn's sister was a woman named Ruth, 68 years old, who opened the door before they knocked. She had been watching from the front window and looked in at the group of them on her porch with the expression of a woman who had agreed to something without being told what it was and was now making her peace with the gap between expectation and reality. Ground floor bedroom is ready, Ruth said. There's soup on the stove. I'm going to the grocery store, and I'm going to be there for a very long time. She picked up her bag from the hallway table and walked past them down the porch steps without another word. Evelyn watched her go. She's always been better at this than I have. They got Natalie into the bedroom. It was a small room with a window that looked onto a backyard with a dormant garden and a wooden fence. And the bed was a proper bed with a proper mattress. And Natalie lowered herself onto it with the concentrated care of someone parallel parking in a tight space. Okay, she said when she was settled. She breathed for a moment. Okay. Evelyn checked the IV line and the dressing on the lower wound and made the small sounds of a physician conducting a silent inventory and finding the results acceptable. Damon stood in the doorway. I need to go find Caleb, he said. Marshall behind him. I'll drive. No. Stay with them. Damon, stay with them, Marshall. He said it without heat. If someone comes to this address, I need you here, not with me. Marshall looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Damon looked at Natalie. Don't die while I'm gone, he said. That was always my plan, she said. He left. He drove the anonymous gray sedan back toward Providence, and he called Caleb's number twice before Caleb picked up. And when Caleb picked up, his voice had the specific quality of a man who has been waiting for a call and dreading it simultaneously, and who answers it anyway, because the alternative waiting is worse than whatever the call brings. Where are you? Damon said. A pause. The hospital. With my mom. She had dialysis. I know about the dialysis. I need you to meet me. Another pause. Longer. Damon. I'm not calling to do what you think I'm calling to do. I need to talk to you. Face to face. You owe me that. Silence on the line. Then okay. Caleb's voice was stripped down to something very small. Okay. Where? They met at a diner on the east side of the city, the kind of diner that had been in that location for 40 years and had not updated anything in 35, with booths upholstered in vinyl that had cracked along the seams and been repaired with tape and cracked again. The lunch crowd was thinning out. Nobody looked at Damon when he came in. Caleb was already in a booth in the back. He was 27 years old, and he looked, right now, approximately 45. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there a week ago, and his hands on the table were not quite still. He was wearing the same jacket he had worn to the doc manifest that morning, which meant he had gone directly from the hospital to here, and he had not thought about changing clothes or thought about it and decided it did not matter. Damon slid into the booth across from him and did not speak. Caleb looked at the table for a moment and then looked up. Is she alive? Yes. He closed his eyes, opened them. I didn't know they were going to. I didn't know what they were going to do with the information. I told them she had come to you and that you were getting her medical help. That's all I said. That's all you needed to say. I know. His voice cracked slightly, and he held it together by what looked like sheer force of the desire not to fall apart in front of Damon. They called me. Last month. Someone from Stonehaven's legal office. They said they were aware that my mother was a dialysis patient at Eastside, and that her coverage was. He stopped. They were very polite about it. Very careful. They said they hoped her care would be able to continue without disruption. And this morning they called again and said they needed to know if Natalie Wescott had made contact with anyone in the organization. They said if I told them, my mother's situation would be resolved permanently. Her coverage, her care access, everything. His hands pressed flat on the table. They said if I didn't, Caleb. She needs dialysis 3 times a week, Damon. 3 times a week, every week, for the rest of her life. If that, he stopped again. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to tell, because telling anyone meant telling you, and telling you meant. Mean what? Caleb looked at him. Mean you'd find out I'd already told them things. A month ago. Small things. Where you'd been. What you'd been doing. He looked back at the table. I've been telling them small things for a month, because they kept moving the line. The diner was quiet around them. Someone's coffee cup met a saucer 2 booths away. A cook said something to a server in the kitchen, and the server laughed. Damon sat with what Caleb had just told him. A month. Not this morning. A month. What did you tell them? Damon said. His voice was very quiet. Scheduling, doc activity. Who you met with. Nothing operational. I don't have access to operational details. You restructured that 2 years ago. But enough that they could. He could not finish the sentence. Enough that they knew I was on that service road last night. Caleb's face confirmed it before he spoke. I didn't know she was going to be there. I didn't know anyone was going to be hurt. They told me they needed to know your movements because they were concerned about. He stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like what it is. I know, and sat. They sat in silence for a moment that stretched long enough to become its own complete thing. Damon looked at his cousin's face, 27 years old, the son of his father's younger brother, who had come to work in the organization at 23 because the other options available to a kid with his background in this city were more dangerous and paid worse, who had been good at his job and loyal in every way that loyalty had been tested until it had been tested in the specific way that it broke him. Your mother, Damon said. She's currently at Eastside? Yes. I'm going to make a call tonight. She's going to be transferred to a facility outside the Stonehaven network. Her care is going to be arranged and covered. He watched Caleb's face. That is not conditional on anything. That's happening regardless. Caleb looked at him with the expression of someone receiving something they do not believe they deserve. Damon, I need you to do one thing. Anything. I need you to tell me everything you told them. Every conversation, every piece of information, every contact. All of it. From the beginning. Damon held his eyes. And then I need you to get out of Providence. Not because I'm sending you away as punishment. Because you're not safe here anymore, and I cannot protect you if you're here. Caleb's jaw moved. And after is after. Right now there's no after. There's only tonight. Caleb told him everything. It took 40 minutes and 2 cups of coffee that neither of them drank, and it was, in its totality, both worse and better than Damon had expected worse, because the depth of access stretched further back than a month in certain peripheral ways, Better because Caleb had not known enough to expose the things that would have been most damaging. What Carradine had gotten from Caleb was visibility, movement patterns, a window into Damon's decision-making rhythm. Enough to anticipate, not enough to fully counter. Which meant Carradine knew Damon was moving toward the federal option. Which meant Carradine was not waiting to find out what Damon decided. Damon drove back to Warwick with that understanding sitting in the front of his mind, heavy and cold, and he called Victor on the way and said 3 things. Move the contact to tonight, not this evening tonight, meaning the next 3 hours. Include the cargo movement information from this morning in what you deliver, and find out everything available about Rebecca Langdon's current investigative docket. Victor said, Rebecca Langdon has been looking at Stonehaven-adjacent activity for 14 months. Damon said, how close is she? Victor said, close enough that she'll know what your documentation means the moment she reads it. Close enough that she's been building her own case, and yours is the piece she's been missing. Damon said, then make the call. He was back in Warwick at 2:15 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. Marshall was in the hallway outside Natalie's room, with his arms crossed and his back against the wall, the position of a man standing guard, in the way that men who have stood guard for long years stand guard, not dramatically, not with any visible performance of vigilance, just present and completely alert. Anything, Damon said. Nothing quiet. Marshall looked at him. Caleb? Handled. Marshall looked at him for a moment, reading the word and what it did and did not mean. He's okay? He will be. He's leaving the city tonight. Damon moved toward the bedroom door. Natalie, awake. She and Evelyn have been talking for the last hour. Medical things, I think. I stopped listening. He paused. She asked about you twice. Damon went into the room. Natalie was propped against the headboard with a tablet on her lap that had appeared from somewhere Ruth's, probably, and she was writing on it with a stylus, adding to whatever she had been building from memory since the digital files were deleted. She looked up when he came in. Caleb, she said, is going to be fine. He's leaving Providence tonight. She absorbed that. Did you? I didn't hurt him? I'm not going to hurt him. He sat down in the chair that had been pulled up beside the bed, the chair that was becoming, in some way, he did not examine, a position he had begun to think of as his. He's 27 years old, and they found the exact thing that would break him, and they used it. He stopped. That's not an excuse, but it's a fact. I know, she said. It's the same way they built the whole operation. They found what people needed, and they used it. She set the stylus down. Victor? Called an hour ago. He's making contact with Langdon tonight. The cargo movement information is included. He looked at the tablet on her lap. What are you writing? The last 11 pages from memory. I've been going through them section by section with Evelyn because she can verify the pharmaceutical concentration methodology. Having a corroborating witness for the technical accuracy of the documentation matters. She paused. She also told me about a conversation she had with Caroline 8 years ago, about a pharmaceutical audit report. She looked at him steadily. Caroline was looking at this 8 years ago. She was told she was wrong. Damon was quiet. 8 years, he said. Yes, how many patients in 8 years? More than 71. Her voice did not change. I counted to 71 from the records I could access. The earlier period, the records I couldn't fully access, I have estimates. I don't have confirmation. She picked the stylus back up. I'm not including the estimates in the documentation. I'm including only what I can verify, even if the real number is higher. Especially then. She met his eyes, because a document that overstates its case gives a defense attorney a specific kind of opening, and I have spent 3 years building something that I will not let be dismantled on cross-examination because I wanted the numbers to be bigger than I can prove. She held his look. The truth is enough. It has to be enough. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Victor called. I've spoken to Langdon's office, Victor said. She knows who she's getting the call from, which means she knows what it means that I'm calling, and her response was a brief pause. She wants a meeting tonight, in person, with the primary witness. Damon looked at Natalie. She needs a location, Damon said. She suggested federal offices. No. Natalie said it from across the room, clearly enough that Victor could hear it. Not federal offices. Somewhere neutral that neither side controls. She'll know what that means, Victor said. She'll know you're not certain about your own security. Good, Natalie said. Then she'll understand why she needs to move quickly. Victor named a location, a federal attorney's personal office in the east side of Providence. Someone sits outside Langdon's chain of command, someone whose office would not appear on any Stonehaven-adjacent radar. Langdon had suggested it herself, which told Damon something about where Langdon's head was regarding the integrity of the normal channels. She didn't trust them either. They left for Providence at 6 p.m. This time, getting Natalie to the car was harder. Greenwood splitting. The afternoon had stiffened her, and Evelyn's expression during the transfer was the expression of a woman performing a calculation with deteriorating variables. But Natalie got into the car, and she stayed in the car, and she did not make any sounds that suggested she was in more trouble than the situation already contained, which Evelyn accepted as the best available outcome. The drive back into the city took them through the early evening traffic of a Wednesday, the particular density of commuters and delivery trucks, and the general mass of a city trying to move itself from one part of the day to the next. Damon drove. Marshall was not with them. He was at the Warwick house, watching it, at Damon's instruction. If anyone came to that address while they were gone, if Carradine's people had gotten to it, somehow Marshall was the measure of what that would look like. In the seat, Evelyn was monitoring Natalie's vitals with a portable pulse oximeter and the focused attention of someone who has agreed to sanction something and is watching the evidence that it was or was not the right call. Natalie was looking out the window. She had the notebook in her lap, closed, rubber-banded. She had the tablet, too, with the additional pages she had drafted. "Can I ask you something?" Damon said. "Yes, when you were at Stonehaven. Before they put the allegation in your file. Before any of this, when you were just a nurse on a night shift and you noticed the vials were different." He kept his eyes on the road. "What made you keep going after they told you that you were wrong?" She was quiet for a moment. "My sister's name," she said. "Rebecca. When she was sick, she used to say that the worst part wasn't the pain. The worst part was feeling like the pain wasn't real to anyone but her." She paused. She died believing the doctors were right and her own body's experience was wrong. She spent her last weeks apologizing for being a difficult patient. Another pause. "I could not let that be the end of the sentence. I needed the sentence to have a different end." She looked at the back of his head. "That probably sounds no," Damon said. "It doesn't." They reached the address at 648. It was a brownstone on a quiet residential street that had been converted to professional offices, 3 steps up from the sidewalk. Brass nameplate beside the door. A sound scene dead split, the kind of building that looked like it handled estate law and financial planning and would not attract the attention of anyone looking for something more significant. Rebecca Langdon was already inside. Damon knew her by reputation and by the specific quality of her stillness. When he walked into the room, the stillness of a prosecutor who has spent 20 years deciding how much of what she thinks to let show on her face, which is to say almost none of it. She was 55, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of dark suit that said her clothing choices were entirely functional decisions. And she looked at Damon Alderidge, walking into the room with a shot-up nurse on his arm and a retired surgeon behind him, and she made no visible evaluation of any of it. "Mr. Alderidge," she said, "I've been waiting to meet you for a while." "I'm aware," Damon said. Her eyes moved to Natalie. Something in her face adjusted minutely. "Miss Wescott." "Prosecutor Langdon," Natalie said. "Sit down, please." "You look like you need to." They sat. The office belonged to a federal defense attorney named Paul Kessler, who was not present, who had made himself absent in the specific way of a man who has agreed to lend his space to something he does not want to have witnessed. Langdon set a legal pad on the desk in front of her and put a pen beside it and looked at them. "I'm going to tell you what I know," she said, "because I think it will save time. I've been investigating Stonehaven Medical Group's pharmaceutical supply chain for 14 months. I have evidence of interstate transport, of medical contraband, and circumstantial evidence of deliberate patient harm. I do not have enough for federal prosecution." She paused. "Your attorney indicated that you have documentation that may close that gap." I'm here to determine if that's accurate. It's accurate, Natalie said. I'd like to see it. Natalie set the notebook on the desk. Langdon looked at it. She did not reach for it immediately. She looked at the water stains on the cover and the rubber band and the pages visible at the top edge, and then she looked at Natalie. Before I open this, she said, I need you to tell me one thing. Were you under any form of duress, coercion, or inducement when this was compiled? No, Natalie said. Were you working with or for any member of Mr. Alderidge's organization when you compiled it? No. I compiled it alone over 3 years before I made contact with Mr. Alderidge, and Mr. Alderidge's involvement began when? Approximately 36 hours ago, Natalie said, when he found me on a road after I'd been shot. Langdon looked at Damon. Your attorney indicated there are also doc records, she said. Cargo manifests and approval documentation from the Alderidge waterfront facilities. Yes, Damon said. You understand what those records mean for you, if they're what your attorney described? Yes. You understand that providing them voluntarily changes your exposure in certain ways and does not change it in others. My attorney has explained the parameters, and you're proceeding. I'm proceeding. Langdon looked at him for a long moment. The look of a woman trying to determine the answer to a question she does not ask out loud. Then she opened the notebook. She read in silence. The office was very quiet, the kind of quiet that specific buildings hold at 7 in the evening when everyone else has gone home, and the street outside carries only the muffled sound of distant traffic. Evelyn sat in the corner with her hands in her lap. Natalie sat across from Langdon and watched her read without appearing to watch her. Damon sat with his hands folded and his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. He was thinking about the waterfront contact's call from this morning. 2 trucks, moving since 9 a.m. refrigerated cargo, no manifest filed. The inventory, that was the physical proof of everything in that notebook, and it was in those trucks right now, moving toward some arrangement that would scatter it across enough geography to make it unprosecutable as a single operation. Prosecutor Langdon, he said. She looked up from the notebook. The inventory is moving. It started this morning. 2 refrigerated trucks out of the Stonehaven dock facility. No port authority manifest. If that cargo is distributed before you can establish its location, the documentation in that notebook is substantially more difficult to prosecute. Langdon set the notebook down carefully. Do you have a location for the trucks? I have a probable destination, a cold chain storage facility in Attleboro, Massachusetts. It's been used for Stonehaven adjacent freight before I have a dock supervisor who can testify to that. He paused. But probable isn't certain, and if you move on probable and I'm wrong, we've used the only window we have. Langdon looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and made a call that she did not take outside the room, which told Damon that the call was to someone she trusted enough to not need privacy for. I need a trace on 2 refrigerated cargo vehicles, she said when someone picked up. She gave the description from what Damon had told her. She gave the Stonehaven facility address of origin. She said, I need this in the next 2 hours. I need it clean, I need it documented, and I need it done without any contact with the Providence PD Organized Crime Division. She listened for a moment. Yes, Hollister specifically. Nothing goes near him. She listened again. Call me back. She set the phone down. Grant Hollister, Natalie said. I know about Hollister, Langdon said. Her voice did not change temperature. I've known there was a leak in the Providence PD for 8 months. Identifying the specific person has been, she stopped. The notebook has 3 entries that reference him directly. Yes, circumstantial, not entirely. Langdon looked at the notebook. Page 9. The allegation placed in your employment file. The date of that allegation and the date of the internal complaint you filed the gap is 72 hours. She paused. I have a document from the Stonehaven Compliance Office dated within that same window that references a Providence PD contact. She let that sit for a moment. I've been waiting for something to tie the date to the specific complaint you filed. This notebook does that. Natalie was very still. He's been in this from the beginning, she said. From before your complaint. Langdon picked up her pen. Ms. Wescott, I need you to understand something. When this moves forward, and based on what I've read in the last 20 minutes, It is going to move forward. There is a specific way I want to handle your testimony. I want to talk to you about that before anything else happens. What way? I don't want you on a witness stand if I can avoid it. She held Natalie's eyes. Not because your testimony isn't credible, because their attorneys are going to come after your credibility. With everything they have, the employment allegation, the narcotics warrant, the accident report. They're going to spend 2 weeks in pre-trial building. A picture of you as a disturbed, vindictive, drug-addicted woman, and then they're going to put you on a stand and take that picture apart in front of a jury. She paused. The 11 pages of this notebook were written before you had any contact with law enforcement, before any arrests existed, before you had anything to gain. They are a contemporaneous record. They are in some ways more powerful than your testimony. You want to use the notebook instead of me. I want to use the notebook in addition to you. But I want to use it first. I want to put it in front of a jury before they've had a chance to decide what kind of woman you are. She tapped the cover with one finger. This was written by someone who had just been shot and was recovering from surgery and had just had 3 years of evidence deleted. And it is accurate and detailed and entirely without exaggeration. That's a harder thing to attack than a witness. The room was quiet. Then Damon's phone vibrated. A text from the waterfront contact. 6 words and a highway number. Attleboro. You were right. They're moving. He showed it to Langdon. She looked at it and picked up her phone and made another call, and this time the call was different in quality, shorter, more specific. The clipped language of someone issuing instructions rather than making requests, and when she hung up, her face had changed in a way that was subtle but visible, the change of a woman who has spent 14 months running towards something and has just closed the last gap between herself and it. We have them, she said. It was not triumphant. It was simply factual, Tsai. The way Natalie's voice was factual, and Damon thought for a moment that these were 2 women who had learned, in different worlds and through different methods, the same specific discipline, to say only what was true and to say it in exactly the words it required. What happens now, Natalie said. Federal agents intercept the cargo within the next 90 minutes. Langdon was already writing. Tomorrow morning I will be in front of a federal judge with a warrant application that is the most comprehensive thing I have filed in 20 years. She looked up. And by tomorrow afternoon, Preston Carradine is going to have a problem that he cannot call his way out of. Outside, Providence was doing what it did at 7:30. In the evening, the restaurants filling up, the commuters gone, the streets settling into the particular rhythm of a city in its evening posture, easy and indifferent, and completely unaware of what was moving through it. Inside the brownstone office, a federal prosecutor was writing on a legal pad, and a retired nurse was sitting with a water-stained notebook in her lap, and a mafia boss was looking at his phone, where 6 words and a highway number had just changed the shape of the next 24 hours. Damon looked at Natalie. She looked back at him. It's not over, she said. It was not a question. No, he said. But the part where they get to decide the ending is. Langdon's pen kept moving. The clock on the fall said 7:41, and somewhere on a Massachusetts highway, a refrigerated cargo truck was about to have company it had not planned on, and in a brownstone on a quiet Providence street, the pieces of 3 years of one woman's careful, costly, meticulous work were being read by the one person who had been positioned, for 14 months, to know exactly what to do with them. And the distance between where they were and where justice lived had just gotten small enough that you could see across it. Small enough, but not yet crossed. There was still tomorrow morning. There was still the warrant. There was still Preston Carradine, who had not yet been told that his phone call to Damon Alderidge had been the last negotiation he would be offered, and who was sitting somewhere tonight in the specific comfort of a man who believed he had already won, and whose attorney was going to receive a very different kind of call before. The federal agents intercepted the trucks at 9:14 that night on Route 1 in Attleboro, Massachusetts, 4 miles from the cold chain storage facility that Damon's waterfront contact had identified. Rebecca Langdon was not there when it happened. She was still in Paul Kessler's borrowed office in Providence, writing, while a federal agent relayed the interception in real time over the phone, and she wrote down every detail in the precise shorthand of a woman who has learned that what gets written in the first hour is what you trust in month 6 of A. Prosecution when memory has begun to fill in its own gaps. Damon heard about the interception from Langdon, who put down the phone and said simply, "Both trucks. The inventory is intact." Natalie closed her eyes for a moment. Not relief, exactly. Something more complicated than relief, the expression of a person's setting down a weight they had been carrying for so long that they were not yet sure what their body felt like without it. "How many vials?" she said. "They're still counting." The agent said the quantity is substantial. Langdon looked at her notes. "There is also compounding equipment in the second truck, and documentation, shipping manifests, pharmaceutical lot records, correspondence between Stonehaven's pharmaceutical director and an external distribution network." She set the pen down. "This is more than I expected." "It's more than I expected too," Natalie said. They had gotten arrogant. When an operation runs long enough without consequence, the people running it stop hiding things as carefully as they used to. Langdon looked at her. "You predicted they would move the inventory." "I predicted they would try to move it if they thought the investigation was closing in. What I didn't know was how much would be left." Natalie paused. "I expected them to have already moved most of it. The fact that they hadn't means the operation was still actively running." Her voice did not change temperature, but something behind it did. "They were still doing it, right up until this week." Nobody in the room spoke for a moment. Damon looked at the floor. "Active, right up until this week." Which meant while he had been going through the ordinary motions of the last month doc meetings, quarterly approvals, the specific bureaucratic rhythm of managing an organization, patients had still been receiving diluted medication, and their families had still been watching them die, in more pain than anyone understood, and writing it off as the cost of the disease. He thought about that and set it somewhere specific, in the place he put things that needed to be felt properly later, when there was time and privacy for it. "What happens? In the morning," he said. "In the morning, I go to a federal judge with a warrant application that now includes physical evidence, chain of custody from the interception tonight, and the documentation from this notebook." Langdon looked at the notebook on the desk between them. "I'll need to take this with me." "It's yours," Natalie said. "I made a copy." She tapped the tablet beside her. "The copy may be admissible. I want to ensure the original is in protective custody tonight." She paused. "I also need a formal statement from you, sworn and signed, covering everything in those pages and everything you told me tonight. I need it before I file tomorrow morning. I can do that now." "You were shot 36 hours ago." "I know when I was shot." Natalie met Langdon's eyes steadily. "I have been building toward this conversation for 3 years. I can give you a sworn statement tonight." Langdon looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Natalie with the expression of a physician who has long since accepted that this particular patient's decisions were going to fall outside the parameters of clinical recommendation and had made her peace with providing the best possible medical supervision for whatever those decisions produced. Her vitals are stable. She should be in bed, but she's been functional all day, and I don't expect that to change in the next 2 hours. "Then we'll do it now," Langdon said, and reached into her briefcase for the recording equipment. They were in that office until 11:47 at night. The statement Natalie gave was the most organized account of 3 years of covert documentation that Damon had ever heard, which was not saying nothing, given that he had spent 20 years surrounded by people who needed to communicate sensitive information carefully and accurately. A sound like green wood splitting. She went through it section by section, referencing the notebook when Langdon asked for specific lot numbers or dates, correcting herself twice when her memory of a specific sequence differed slightly from what she had written, flagging those discrepancies herself before Langdon could find them. At one point, Langdon stopped and looked at her. "You flagged that inconsistency before I identified it," Langdon said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I don't flag it, your opposing counsel will, and it looks different when it comes from them than when it comes from me." Natalie looked at her evenly. "I have been building this to survive cross-examination. Every weakness I identify and explain is one less weapon someone gets to use against the whole." Langdon wrote something on her pad that Damon could not read from where he was sitting. He thought it might not have been a legal note. They left the office at midnight. The drive back to Warwick was quiet, in the specific way of people who have used up most of their words, and are now running on the specific economy of people who are very tired and have done something that cannot be undone, and are sitting with both of those things simultaneously. The back seat, Natalie fell asleep before they reached the highway. Evelyn checked her pulse with 2 fingers against her wrist without waking her, and then sat back and looked at the road. Damon drove. At some point, Marshall texted from the Warwick house. "Quiet here." Nothing moved. Damon texted back, "We're coming." Zaratan. They got to the house at 12:38 and got Natalie back into the ground floor bedroom with the practiced efficiency of a group of people who had done this transfer enough times in the last 24 hours that they had stopped narrating it and just did it. She woke up briefly when they moved her from the car. "The warrant," she said. "Tomorrow morning," Damon said. "Langdon's filing it tomorrow morning." "Okay." She closed her eyes again. "Okay." He sat in the hallway outside her door for a while. Marshall came and sat beside him, both of them on the floor, with their backs against the wall, the way men sit when there are no chairs, and the hour is too late to go looking for them. "Caleb," Marshall said quietly, "left the city at 9. I got a text. Where's he going?" "His aunt's place in Baltimore. I set up the medical transfer for his mother. She'll be moved to a facility in New Haven by the end of the week." Damon looked at the ceiling. "He's not coming back." No, they were quiet. "Victor called while you were at the meeting," Marshall said. "He wanted me to tell you that the formal cooperation agreement documentation is ready for your signature. He said, tomorrow morning whenever you're ready. I know what signing it means. I know you know. I need you to understand something." Damon looked at him. "When this is over, after the warrants, after the arrests, after whatever comes next, the federal case is going to include the dock operation. Not all of it, but significant parts of it. People who work for us are going to be involved. I know. I can't protect them from that. I signed those approvals. I ran those docs. Whatever comes from this, I have to answer for my part of it, and I can't separate my part from theirs." Marshall looked at him for a long moment. "I've worked for your family for 31 years, he said. "I knew what I was working for. So did most of the others." He paused. "That's not the same as saying what happens to them is fine. But it's different from what happened to those patients." "We made choices, so did I," Damon said. "So did you." They sat with that until around 2 in the morning, when Marshall fell against the wall, with his chin on his chest and his breathing going slow and steady, and Damon sat awake beside him and listened to the house settle around them and thought about his mother in bed 12, and Rebecca Wescott, 20 years old, and 71 names in a water-stained notebook, and a woman who had spent 3 years building something careful and true in the dark, and had driven it straight into the road that led to him. Preston Carradine was arrested at 7:44 the next morning outside the headquarters of Stonehaven Medical Group. Damon was not there. He was in Victor Hale's office, signing the cooperation agreement documentation, which was 16 pages long and contained language that Victor had spent the night refining, and that Damon read completely before signing any of it. Because in 20 years of operating in Providence, he had learned that the specific words of a document were the document, and not the conversation that surrounded it. He signed his name on the last page at 7:51. 3 minutes later, his phone showed a news alert. He looked at it. He set it face down on Victor's desk. "It's done," Victor said. "It started," Damon said. "It's not done." Grant Hollister was arrested at his home at 8:15. Stonehaven's pharmaceutical director, a man named Leonard Voss, who had run the dilution operation from inside the processing facility for 8 years, was arrested at his office at 9. Executives followed through the morning in the specific cascade of an organization whose legal architecture has been dismantled so thoroughly that there is nothing to hide behind each arrest-producing documentation that pointed toward the next one. This whole structure coming apart with the particular speed of something that had been held together by concealment rather than by any inherent structural integrity. The fabricated narcotics warrant for Natalie was withdrawn by 10A. On the grounds of insufficient evidentiary basis. Rebecca Langdon called to tell Natalie personally. Natalie was in the Warwick bedroom with Evelyn's tablet on her lap, and she listened to Langdon deliver the information and said, "Thank you," and set the phone down and did not say anything else for a while. Evelyn, from the chair in the corner where she had been reading, "You should eat something." "I know. That's not a suggestion." "I know that either." Natalie looked at the ceiling. "Evelyn, what? Did you ever go back and look at the audit report? The one Caroline brought you 8 years ago?" Evelyn set the book down. "No." A long pause. "Because looking would have meant believing, and believing would have meant doing something about it. And I had just retired, and I was tired, and I told myself that Caroline was being thorough, in the way that very thorough people sometimes chase patterns that aren't there." She looked at her hands. "I was wrong. I knew I might be wrong when I said it. I said it anyway." Natalie looked at her. "You came when I needed a surgeon." "That's not absolution." "I know, but it's what happened." She turned back to the ceiling. "I had misministered a medication I thought might be wrong, and told myself the hospital couldn't be wrong. You dismissed a report you thought might be right, and told yourself the investigator might be too thorough. We both looked at something that frightened us, and found reasons to look away." She paused. "The difference between us and Carradine isn't that we're better people. It's that when we ran out of reasons to look away, we stopped looking away." Evelyn was quiet for a long time. "That's a harder thing to live with than the other version," she said finally. "Yes," Natalie said, "it is." The preliminary hearing for Preston Carradine happened 6 weeks later. Damon was not present. His cooperation with the federal investigation was ongoing, and his own legal proceedings were moving through a separate process that was as clean as the situation allowed, which was to say not very clean, but structurally sound. And Damon was cooperating fully with both, which meant his days had acquired a new shape: federal meetings in the morning, his own attorneys in the afternoon, and in the evenings a quiet that he was still learning to occupy. The organization at the waterfront had contracted. Some of that was legal consequence. Some of it was the specific attrition that happens to a criminal enterprise when its leader stops actively maintaining it. People dispersing, operations winding down, the infrastructure of 20 years beginning to disassemble itself with a kind of bleak efficiency. Damon watched it happen and did not try to stop it. He visited the Warwick house twice during the 6 weeks Natalie stayed there recovering. Once the documents that Langdon needed her to review and sign, and once for no reason that he named when he showed up at the door except that Marshall was with him. And Marshall had brought food from a restaurant near the waterfront that Natalie had mentioned in passing during one of the document review sessions. She ate most of it, which Evelyn observed and noted with the satisfaction of a physician whose patient was finally doing what the physician had recommended for weeks. "You didn't have to do this," Natalie said to Damon over the food. "Marshall picked it. Marshall picked it because you told him to. He makes his own decisions. He makes his own decisions within the parameters of what you've decided," she said. "You've been doing that for 20 years. I've been watching you do it for 2 days. I understand how it works." She ate something. "Thank you." He looked at the table. "You asked me once why I chose not to just handle it the way I always handle things. You said you'd answer that later. I'm answering it now." He looked up. "Because the way I always handle things makes the problem smaller. It makes the person smaller. It makes it so you can walk away and not think about what it meant." He paused. "I didn't want to be able to walk away from what happened to my mother and not think about what it meant." Natalie set her fork down. "There's a difference," he said, "between making something stop and making something true. I have spent 20 years making things stop. This was the first time in a long time that the only thing that mattered was making it true." She looked at him for a long moment. "Rebecca's record," she said. "My sister. When Langdon amends the records, when the official documentation is corrected, Rebecca's record will show that her medication was compromised, that she was in more pain than anyone knew, that her death may have come earlier than it should have." She paused. "It won't change anything that happened, but it will mean that what happened to her is in a document somewhere that nobody can delete." She picked up her fork again. "That's what I came to your road for. Not justice. Not revenge. Just the truth existing somewhere permanent." Damon nodded. "Rebecca," he said, "your sister's name." "Yes, and my mother, yes." They finished the food, and Damon and Marshall left, and the Warwick house went back to its quiet, and Outside, the dormant garden was beginning to show the first suggestion of spring green at the edges of the fence line where the light hit longest. The trial of Preston Carradine began 7 months after the arrests. It lasted 11 weeks. Carradine's attorneys were as good as Natalie had predicted, and better than Langdon had publicly acknowledged, and they came into the courtroom with a specific strategy: destroy the credibility of the primary witness before the jury had time to form any attachment to her testimony. Then argue that the physical evidence had been obtained through a cooperation agreement with a known criminal and was therefore tainted at its source. The credibility attack on Natalie consumed 3 weeks of pre-trial maneuvering. The fabricated narcotics warrant, though withdrawn, was introduced as evidence of a pattern of erratic and dishonest behavior. The employment file allegation was entered. A pharmacist Stonehaven's team had located, who claimed Natalie had once improperly accessed medication storage at a previous facility, testified for 40 minutes before Victor, sitting in the gallery as a neutral observer, noted to Langdon's second chair that the pharmacist's testimony contradicted a time-stamped security access log from the same facility by approximately 6 hours. The security log was subpoenaed overnight, and the pharmacist's testimony was the following morning, in under 14 minutes. But the attack had done its intended work. The jury had spent 3 weeks hearing Natalie Wescott described in specific, calculated terms, and whatever they had decided it before she ever appeared in the room. Langdon did something then that Carradine's team had not anticipated. She did not call Natalie. She called Evelyn Harrow. Evelyn took the stand in the way she did everything, without drama, without performance. A sound like greenwood splitting, with the precise and complete authority of a woman who had spent 40 years in operating rooms and had learned that the only effective answer to a question was the accurate one. She authenticated the 11-page document. She testified to the circumstances under which it was created: a woman recovering from 2 gunshot wounds, without access to her original files, in the first 12 hours after making contact with federal authorities, before any arrests had been made or any cooperation agreement had been discussed. The document went into evidence. Langdon introduced it to the jury not as Natalie's testimony, but as a record, a thing that had existed before any legal proceedings, before any incentive to construct or embellish, written by a woman who at the time of writing had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Handwriting experts authenticated it. Pharmaceutical chemists testified about the concentration differentials. It described and confirmed them against the physical inventory recovered from the Massachusetts trucks. Government records independently verified 19 of the 71 patients Natalie had documented. 9 more were confirmed through family testimony. 3 were removed from the formal case record because Langdon could not establish them beyond reasonable doubt and chose not to overstate what she could prove. The defense prepared to destroy a witness. They faced a document instead. And documents do not get nervous on cross-examination. Documents do not have histories that can be characterized and reframed. Documents sit in evidence binders and say the same thing every time someone opens them, in the same handwriting on the same water-stained pages, with the same lot numbers and the same dates and the same carefully flagged uncertainties that Natalie had flagged herself before anyone could use them as weapons. Carradine's lead attorney requested permission to recall Natalie as a hostile witness in the defense's case. Langdon did not object. Natalie took the stand. She had been in the gallery for 3 weeks watching. She knew exactly what had been established and what had been questioned and what had been questioned and what the jury's faces looked like when specific pieces of evidence were introduced. She had watched the defense's strategy with the same focused, clinical attention she brought to everything, and she had discussed it with Langdon after each session in the evenings, and she was as prepared as a person could be for what the defense attorney was going to try to do. The cross-examination lasted 4 hours across 2 days. A sound like greenwood splitting, the attorney, a man named Clifford Marsh, who had spent 30 years defending pharmaceutical and medical clients and who was very good at his job, approached the credibility attack from 3 directions: the employment allegation, the narcotics warrant, and the claim that her documentation had been constructed specifically to implicate Stonehaven as revenge for her sister's death. Natalie answered every question in the specific way she answered everything directly, precisely, without elaboration beyond what the question required, flagging her own uncertainties before they could be identified as inconsistencies, and correcting Marsh when he misstated something in a question with the quiet, unbothered precision of someone who is not angry and is not performing composure and is simply accurate. Marsh asked her about the employment allegation. She said it was fabricated. She said she believed Grant Hollister had facilitated its placement. She said she understood that belief was not the same as proof and that she had not included it in her documentation as a confirmed fact, only as a circumstantial indication. Marsh asked her about the narcotics warrant. She said it was fabricated. She said it had been withdrawn on the grounds of insufficient evidentiary basis. She said she understood that its existence, even withdrawn, was being used to suggest a pattern of behavior, a sound that she would let the jury evaluate the timing of its issuance against the timeline of her contact with federal authorities and make their own determination. Marsh asked her about Rebecca. She did not answer immediately. Not because she was composing herself. She had composed herself for this specific question weeks ago. She paused because she wanted the question to have the weight it deserved before she answered it. Yes, she said. My sister died at Stonehaven. Her name was Rebecca Wescott. She was 20 years old. She looked at Marsh steadily. You're suggesting that my documentation is revenge for her death. I'd like to ask you something in return, and I understand if the court determines it's not appropriate. She glanced at the judge, who made a small gesture indicating she could continue. If it were revenge, why does the documentation flag its own weaknesses? Why does it identify 3 victims I could not confirm and note them as unconfirmable? Why does it correct itself in 2 places where my memory of a sequence was slightly different from what I later verified in the record? She paused. Revenge doesn't do that. Revenge wants the number to be bigger, not smaller. Revenge doesn't remove cases it can't prove. She looked at the jury for the first time. I documented what I could confirm because the truth was enough. My sister's name is in that document because her medication was diluted and she deserved to be counted among the people it happened to. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, because she deserved to be counted. Marsh did not ask another question for a long moment. Then he said nothing further. Carradine was convicted on 11 federal counts. Leonard Voss, the pharmaceutical director, received 31 years. Hollister's received 12. The executives, the participating pharmacists, the property officials who had been involved in the attempt to acquire Blackwater Point, they received sentences that ranged from 3 years to 22, depending on the specificity of their involvement and their cooperation with the subsequent plea proceedings. Stonehaven Medical Group was dissolved. Its 4 hospitals were placed under supervised public management by a federal oversight structure that Langdon had spent the final weeks of the trial negotiating with the court. The overseas corporate sale was canceled. The investment structure that had been 11 days away from acquiring the organization when the investigation began received nothing. The records were corrected, all 71 of them, plus the 19 independently verified through government sources. Margaret Alderidge's record was amended to reflect that the medication she received during her final weeks at Stonehaven Memorial had been significantly diluted from its labeled concentration, that the pain management provided was substantially below the documented level, and that this discrepancy was the result of deliberate pharmaceutical fraud. Rebecca Wescott's record was amended in the same way. Damon was in federal custody when the amendments were made. His guilty plea on the charges related to the cargo contract and the dock operation had produced a sentence of 5.5 years. Victor had negotiated as well as the facts allowed, and the facts had not allowed for very much mitigation given the duration and the scope of the approvals Damon had signed. He had not tried to use Natalie's case as leverage for his own. He had not suggested, through Victor or through any other channel, that his cooperation should produce a specific outcome for himself. He had cooperated with the federal investigation because the investigation needed his cooperation to succeed, and he had understood from the night he signed the cooperation documentation that what came after was what came after and was his to answer for. The morning before he reported to the federal facility, he met Natalie at a coffee shop on the south side of Providence. She was walking without any visible accommodation for the wounds now, though she told him later that the lower wound still gave her specific trouble in cold weather, which Providence provided in abundance and would continue to provide. She had cut her hair shorter than it had been in the hospital, and she was wearing civilian clothes jeans, a coat, the particular ordinariness of someone who has recently reclaimed to look like anyone. And she looked different from the woman on the service road, and different from the woman in the hospital bed, and different from the woman on the witness stand, and also like all three of them at once. They sat across from each other with coffee between them. I don't have a way to thank you, Damon said. I'm not saying it as modesty. I mean, the specific thing you did doesn't have a commensurate response. You signed your name, Natalie said. That's the response. It's not enough. It's what was needed. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. It was enough. He looked at her. After the time is done. What are you doing? I've already started, she said. There's a community health clinic in South Providence. A small one. They needed a nurse practitioner, and I have my license back. She paused. And I'm going to teach. Once a week to nursing students. Documentation. Evidence preservation. How to recognize when something doesn't match. How to speak through channels that don't disappear when an institution wants them to. She looked at her coffee. I'm not going to spend my time telling them what happened to me. I'm just going to teach them to write down what they see. That's what you did. That's what worked. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and you don't have to answer it the way I might want you to. Ask, was it worth it? What it cost you? 3 years of your life? What they did to your career? Your sister not seeing any of this, he stopped. Was it worth what it took to get here? Natalie sat with the question for a long time. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because the question deserved the length of the silence she gave it. Rebecca died, believing she was wrong, she said finally. She died, apologizing. She died thinking her pain wasn't real because everyone around her acted like the paperwork mattered more than what she was feeling. She looked at the table. Her record now says she was right. It says the medication was wrong and the pain was real, and she was not a difficult patient. She was a 20-year-old woman who was being failed by people who were supposed to take care of her. She looked up. I can't bring her back, but I can change what the document says. And a document is the thing that lasts. She paused. Yes, it was worth it. Damon nodded once. He picked up his coffee and drank some of it and set it down. When I get out, he said, I'd like to see how the clinic is going. It'll be going, she said. He reported to the federal facility the following morning. 4 years and 3 months later, he was released on early releases for sustained cooperation and behavior that the facility superintendent described in the formal documentation as consistent and without incident, which was the bureaucratic language for a man who had done what he was supposed to do every day for 4 years, without being asked twice. He came out of the facility on a Tuesday morning in October with a bag that contained everything he had taken in and a phone that needed charging and no car waiting for him, which was by design. He had not wanted ceremony. He had not wanted a car full of people who would feel the need to mark the occasion with words he would have to respond to. He took a taxi to the south side of Providence. He had the address from a letter Natalie had sent him 14 months ago, the only letter she had sent in 4 years, which he had read until the paper had softened along the fold lines. The letter was mostly practical. She described the clinic, the neighborhood, the specific challenges of running a small community health operation in an underfunded part of a city that had more immediate concerns than its own maintenance. It was not an emotional letter. It contained one paragraph at the end that said, "When you come out, come see what the truth built." I think you'll find it was worth knowing. He had that paragraph memorized and did not need the letter to access it. The clinic was on a corner of a residential block between a laundromat and a barber shop. In a converted storefront with a hand-lettered sign in the window and a bulletin board beside the door that had health information and community notices pinned to it in overlapping layers. Through the window, he could see the waiting room, half a dozen, plastic, chairs, a children's play corner with a small bin of toys, a reception desk behind which a young man was on the phone. He did not go in. He sat on the front steps and waited. She came out at 3:40 in the afternoon with a stack of folders under her arm and her coat half on, the look of someone between tasks rather than finished with them. And she stopped on the second step when she saw him, and for a moment her face did the thing that faces do when they encounter something expected and still somehow surprising. "You're early," she said. "I'm exactly on time. Your release date was." "Early release. I sent a letter. I didn't get a letter." The mail from federal facilities is not what I would call efficient. He stood up. "Hello, Natalie." She looked at him for a long moment. He had aged in the specific way that 4 years of federal custody ages men, not dramatically, not in a way that made him look diminished, but in the way of a face that has spent considerable time being still and has settled more deeply into its own structure. She had aged, too, differently, in the way of someone who has been moving rather than waiting, small lines around her eyes from concentrating, a quality of settledness in her expression that had not been there on the service road. "How are you?" she said. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm exactly what I said I would be." He paused. "Can I see it?" She looked at the clinic door and then at him. "Come in." He followed her inside. The waiting room had the specific quality of a room that was used constantly and maintained carefully, clean but not pristine, organized but not institutional. The bulletin boards inside the door had a section labeled "Know Your Rights" and another labeled "How to Document a Medical." Concern with a simple one-page guide pinned to it that he stopped to read. It was Natalie's handwriting. Simplified, formatted for a general audience, but the same precise structure as the notebook. "You wrote this," he said. "Third version. The first 2 were too complicated." She set the folders on the reception desk. "Marcus, this is Damon. He helped with some of the early work that made this possible." Marcus, the young man at the desk, looked at Damon with the specific look of someone who knows more than the introduction suggests and has decided not to indicate that he knows. "Nice to meet you," he said. "You too," Damon said. Natalie took him through the clinic. It took 7 minutes. It was not large, but it was in every room exactly what it was: functional, specific, serving a purpose without pretending to be more than it was. The examination rooms were clean and adequately equipped. The medication storage was locked and logged, and the log was current to the hour. The back room had a shelf of reference materials and a filing system, and a small table where, Natalie explained, that she held the weekly documentation session. "How many students?" he said. "It varies. Usually 6 to 12. Nursing students, mostly from the community college program. Some paramedics." She paused. "Last month, one of the attending physicians from Rhode Island Hospital came. She said she'd heard about what I was teaching and wanted to see it." A brief pause. "She stayed for 3 weeks. He looked at the shelf of reference materials. "Do you tell them?" he said. "What happened?" "I tell them there are 71 documented cases in a federal court record in Providence of patients who received compromised medication over 6 years, and that the documentation that made that prosecution possible was built by one person over 3 years without institutional support." She stood beside him, looking at the shelf. "I tell them the person who built it is available to answer questions if they have them. Usually someone asks." She paused. "I tell them about the 2 vials and the color being slightly off. I tell them I administered it anyway because I told myself I must be wrong. I tell them that was a mistake, and I tell them exactly what the cost was." Her voice was steady and factual and without self-punishment. "And then I tell them to write down what they see. Every time. No matter how small, no matter what the institution seems to say about it. And they listen," he said. "Some of them do." She turned and looked at him. "Some of them are going to look away from things the same way I did, the same way Evelyn did. I can't change that. I can just make sure they know what looking away costs, and trust that some of them will remember it when it matters." They left the clinic and sat on the front steps in the October afternoon. The neighborhood was doing its early evening thing, children coming home from school, a delivery truck making stops, the laundromat next door running its continuous cycle of muffled industry. Behind the building, Damon could hear just barely Through the gap between the clinic and the building behind it, the sound of a basketball hitting pavement in a steady rhythm. They sat with their coffee for a while, in a silence that had none of the quality of the silences on that service road 4 years ago, and all of the weight of them, the specific silence of two people who have been through a specific thing, together, and do not need to perform their way around it. Marshall, Natalie said, retired. He's living in Newport. He calls me every Sunday. He paused. He came to the facility 3 times. He's the only person I let come. How is he? He says he's bored. He's not bored, he's resting, and he doesn't have language for what that feels like yet. Damon looked at the street. He'll be fine. Evelyn went back to consulting, Natalie said. Medical expert witness work. Pharmaceutical cases, mostly. A pause. She says the cases are easier now because she knows exactly what to look for. Caleb, Damon said, have you heard? He sent me a letter. 6 months ago, he's in Baltimore. He's working in logistics. Legal logistics. He was very specific about that description. She almost smiled. His mother is stable. The facility in New Haven apparently is good. Damon nodded. The basketball from behind the building hit the pavement again and again in its steady percussive rhythm. A child's voice said something indistinct, and another child laughed. I need to ask you something, Natalie said, that I didn't ask before. Ask. The night on the road. When I told you what they had done to your mother. When you understood what the timeline meant, the property, the admission, the 59 days. She looked at her hands around the coffee cup. There was a moment where you could have made a different choice. Where the version of you that had spent 20 years solving problems with a specific set of tools was right there. And you didn't. She looked at him. What happened in that moment? What actually happened? He was quiet for a while. He thought about Service Road and the bad light. He thought about the held a phone in her bleeding and had not been afraiding hand and had not been afraid of him and had said, they're counting on you being angry. Please don't be what they're expecting. He thought about his mother in the cherub's bed holding his hand too tightly because he was frightened and a young nurse showing him, without a word, how to hold something fragile without breaking it. I thought about what I would have left, he said finally. If I'd done it the way I knew how to do it, everyone responsible would have been gone, and Margaret Alderidge would still be on record as a woman whose cancer simply won, and Rebecca Wescott would still be on record as a 20-year-old who lost her fight. He paused. And nobody would ever know their names except the people who loved them. He looked at the street. I've sent a lot of people away from their lives over the years. I've told myself it was business, it was necessary, it was the cost of operating in the world I operate in. Maybe some of that was true. He paused. But I could not look at what they did to my mother and respond to it by making it smaller. By making it a private matter between me and the people responsible. It was not a private matter. It was something that had happened to 71 people and their families, and they deserved for it to be true somewhere that mattered. Natalie looked at him for a long time. That's the answer, she said. I know. It's the only one I have. The basketball struck the concrete behind them, steady and rhythmic, the sound of something ordinary continuing regardless of what had happened in its proximity, the sound of children playing in an October afternoon in a neighborhood that had not been changed by any of this, and also had been changed by all of it, in ways too slow and too structural to be visible on any single afternoon, but that would be visible eventually in the records. The records that had been corrected, the names that had been counted, the truth that existed now in documents that nobody could delete. Natalie looked toward the clinic door and then back at the street. Nothing had been given back. Not the months Margaret had spent in more pain than anyone knew. Not Rebecca at 20 years old, dying apologizing for the inconvenience of her own suffering. Not the 3 years Natalie had spent in the dark, building something careful and true with no guarantee it would ever reach the light. Not the years Damon had spent in a federal facility, answering for the things he had done and the things he had failed to ask about, and the specific cost of the difference between those two categories. None of that had been given back. But the sentence had a different ending now, and the record said what happened. And 71 names were in a federal court document that would outlast every person in this story, would outlast the buildings and the organizations, and the careful cruelties, and the imperfect heroisms, and all of it. And what the document said was that these people had existed, and what happened to them had been real, and the people responsible had answered for it. And the truth had proven, in the end, harder to bury than the people who tried to bury it had believed. The basketball struck the pavement, and again, steady, rhythmic, alive.